RTM special meeting for the town of Fairfield on Monday, May 2nd, 2022.
Ed Bateson. Melissa Longo. Marty Fury. Amy Ruggiero.
Here.
Karen McCormick.
Here.
Cindy Perham. Jeff Steele.
Here.
Alex Durrell.
Here, thank you.
Abigail Denzi.
Here.
Tom Lambert.
Here.
Sharon Pastilli.
Here.
Laura Carson.
Here.
Alice Kelly.
Here.
Archie Spalier.
Here.
Liz Zesma.
Here.
Bill Diaz.
Here.
Josh Garskoff.
Here.
Joe Siebert.
Here.
Jay Wolk.
Here.
Steve Barretts.
Here.
Anna Gale. Andy Graceffa.
Here.
Lisa Havey.
Here.
John Kuhn. Mark McDermott.
Here.
Bill Vergara.
Here.
Karen Wackerman.
Here.
Hank Ferentz.
Here.
Pamela Iacono.
Here.
Peter Tallman.
Sorry, here.
Christine Messina.
Here.
Christine Brown.
Here.
Drew Georgiadis.
Here.
Margaret Horton.
Here.
Kelly Cinto.
Here.
Ken Astorita.
Here.
Peter Britton.
Here.
Frank Patisse.
Here.
Story Tallman.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. Okay, can we all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, let's go right into, we'll get right into item number 2. Let's be cognizant that we're supposed to start the official budget meeting at 8 p.m. tonight, so let's not try to repeat each other, and let's be concise and direct in our questions and comments. Thank you. Item number 2 is to hear and consider an appeal by the first select woman and the Director of Human Resources from the following vote of the Board of Finance pertaining to HR 1330 budget to reduce account number 51010 by $110,517 and account number 52200 by $8,454. Request full restoration. Requested account number 51010, $522,770. The Board of Finance has approved $412,253. And account number 52200 is $39,959. Board of Finance has approved $31,505. Can I have a motion to approve? Representative Woke, seconded by, I gotta go to page 2. Representative Havey, thank you. All right, Madam First Select Woman and Mr. Hazelkamp, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think I'll probably head up first and then Brenda will come on. One, I want to just thank the RTM for their time in considering the appeal that we filed out of the HR department. I'll just give a real brief background as to sort of how we got here. Many of you know I've had the opportunity to lead HR departments in 6 municipalities. I have had 7 HR director positions. And I believe since I've been here, I've made it pretty clear in at least the 2 years that I've been here that my view of the HR function in this town is a deficient department. It needed an overhaul. It still needs an overhaul. It still needs resources. And that was sort of how we got to the discussion that Brenda asked me after I had indicated that I was leaving to put together a recommended model. I can say that, you know, in each town that I've been, the responsibility of the HR department have been slightly different. So I think I've seen all of the different permutations that can come out in an HR department. And it was sort of that in mind that I drafted the staffing model that we presented during the budget. That model really attempted to alleviate 2 different issues. One, which was the what I consider staffing deficiencies to really provide basic HR functioning within the department. And secondarily, there was an additional effort on my part to add some staff to deal with what I perceive as a lack of diversity in town. And I know there had been a task force that was involved in some of that. And in several other towns that I've been in, I put in resources to try to address the lack of diversity in towns. So there was an effort to create a part-time position to address affirmative action and recruitment issues. So that was sort of the charge to me in the process of coming up with what the structure should be. What that resulted in was really the following. The risk management position was narrower in focus than I wanted. So there was a creation of an assistant director of HR, which now encompasses the risk management function. There wasn't any salary increase in that. It was basically a swap for the salary of the risk management. And I thought it would be more valuable to the town to have somebody with broader job responsibilities. The next change was really the addition of an HR generalist, which is really to deal more with the deficiencies in the department than anything else. And that was sort of the attempt to get a mid-level professional position in who would focus on sort of the biggest issues facing the department in a whole host of areas. And then the last change is what I just outlined, which is somebody to really address affirmative action issues. Oops, sorry. And that would start with a development of an affirmative action plan, because really without an affirmative action plan, you really don't have the metrics that you need to then hold the town accountable for progress in that regard. So, you know, that was sort of the charge, and that's the charge that I took when I put the budget in place. You know, I think it's a relatively small investment for what I hope would be returns in the future. I think the town the town needs to do something with its HR function, whether you agree with me or not. Whoever gets hired to replace me, I think will be facing the same kind of issues that I have faced. And there's a myriad of causations related to that. Some of it's staffing, which is why we've proposed to modify the staffing. Some of the issues are much larger than just the staffing issues. So we went through the budget process. We presented that to the Board of Finance. Frankly, I wish the Board of Finance had just called before they took their vote so that maybe we could have had some discussions regarding the impact of the cut. You know, I know there's lots of, there has been lots of discussion about what does it mean when they cut the $120,000. I know First Selectman Kupchak has indicated what it means to her, and I think it means the same to me. The town of this size cannot have a risk manager or somebody in charge of the risk management function. It is a very important function. It handles all the workers' comp cases. It handles all the general liability cases and auto claims. So it is not like that can be cut out of the budget. And that's the practical impact of the cut, because at least my math says that in essence, the $120,000 is the equivalent as to what the assistant HR director position would be. So the fallout of what that really means is, I'm guessing that it would be, it's certainly my recommendation, that we're going to have a position with risk management function responsibilities, and it's unlikely that we will have a recruitment specialist or an HR generalist because of the importance of the risk management function to the town. So I guess, in closing, I would recommend and hope that you would consider what I consider a relatively small investment of $120,000 to help the town move forward with its HR department, so that the next person at least would have the resources to accomplish what I think needs to be done in the department. And that's what I have to say about that issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hazelkamp. Madam First Selectwoman, did you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. And I too want to thank the RTM for taking the time to consider the appeal, the 3 appeals that we are going to be discussing with you tonight. I think of the 3 appeals, I would say that this one I found the hardest to understand, to be perfectly honest. This is my 3rd budget that I will be, after the end of tonight, after the budget meeting, this will be the 3rd budget that I have done for the town of Fairfield since I took office. And this is the first time we've ever appealed any reductions to the budget. And we didn't take them lightly. We took them seriously, the appeals that we filed. And as Mr. Hazelkamp alluded to, that the HR department is a crucial department. And while it may not be particularly an exciting department for the average everyday citizen, it is very important to the employees that work for our town. They utilize it regularly for a whole host of reasons. And for our department heads who need assistance in managing their departments, asking all kinds of questions regarding how contracts are supposed to be managed, how are they supposed to be dealing with employees, there's grievances that are filed, there's all kinds of things that are managed to that department. I mean, and some things as simple as didn't get my health insurance card, or I, got charged a copay I wasn't supposed to get charged, and it goes on really and on and on. But it is a very important department, and as I've mentioned for a number of years now since I took over, that obviously my first main focus was to deal with the Phil Pyle scandal, and then COVID hit. But the main focus was to do a really deep dive into every single department within our town government and learn a lot about those departments, and then listen to those department heads and the people who worked in them and ask them, if you had a great, perfect way to redo your department, how would you do it? And we really spent a considerable amount of time learning and listening. And then that's when we put forward the VRIP plan, which we felt would allow us the ability to then start doing reorganization efforts to the department so that we could provide the most efficient and productive services for our community. And so we did do that with a number of departments, and you've all seen those changes and different job descriptions, and sometimes putting jobs together to make one job, or eliminating a specific job to have a more relevant job for the 21st century. And so we've done a lot of that. And HR was always there with us, helping us through this, to their detriment, because they never had a chance to reorganize themselves. And it was really glaringly apparent when Jim took the job that we had some real issues going on in that department that just needed some serious overhaul and reorganization. And So when we finally kind of came up for air after we spent time working on all the other departments, you know, we said, okay, wow, your department's kind of been like left to the end. What can we do to make this department more robust, have it be more efficient, work better? Because frankly, I know, like I said before, that, you know, this is not the thing your average everyday citizen is going to say, oh, I'm upset about the HR department not, you know, being staffed properly. However, you know, having good morale with your employees, having employees feel supported by their town, being able to be in contact and have someone be able to reply to an email or a phone call or stop by the office because they're not so underwater with work, that's an important thing for the employees, the over 500 employees that work for the town of Fairfield. And I think that, you know, the members of the RTM are very familiar with our departments and support our employees as well. And so that's just a very important piece, aside from what Jim is talking about, you know, basic things for the HR department, you know, risk management, every department utilizes risk management in some way, shape, or form. But the basic needs of an HR department that support the over 500 employees, the 500 employees are 150 part-time, are 175 seasonal, are 500 retirees, and 450 Board of Ed pension administration for those employees. And I actually put together something, I just want to bring it up. Jackie's going to pull it up. So, you know, I think there wasn't this sort of level of discussion, unfortunately, at the Board of Finance meeting. And I actually, like as Mr. Hazelkamp said, it would have been helpful if we had had some discussion prior to someone had even called Mr. Hazelkamp to talk to him a little bit about his department and how it works and what it does. And so here you are, you know, labor relations, you know, obviously it's a big deal. Managing collective bargaining agreements, pension plans, interpretation of federal and state labor laws, grievances, hearings, formal complaints, unfair labor practices, mediation, arbitration, and litigation, personnel administration, excuse me, maintain employee and retiree databases, managing confidentiality and freedom of information regulations, handling employment matters, providing customer service to our employees, their family members, our retirees, and the press and the general public. Employee benefits, administer employee benefits including health care, life insurance, self-insured unemployment compensation, pension plans, deferred compensation plans, and other educational material for employees. And as I mentioned a lot over the last year, you know, we've been implementing a lot of new training, and we are going to continue, hopefully, to be able to do that. And this runs through our HR department so that we could assist with, you know, giving our employees the best opportunity to have new training to be the best employees that they can be, so they can serve our community at a top level. Staff services, recruitment, employment risk management, manage employee orientation, interviews, conduct the training programs, tech, general areas, assist with training of department heads, staff, manage job classifications, and compensation matters. And as Mr. Hazelkamp talked about, you know, risk management, that's a big deal. It's workers' comp, it's OSHA regulations, insurance programs, policies for the town property, liability programs, policies for public officials, law enforcement liability, general liability insurance for auto and umbrella policies, and the HR director also assists with the administration of FOI requests when necessary. So as you can see, what we had asked for was a simple, literally one additional staff person in this department. So what we did was we swapped out the risk management position and made it an HR assistant that was going to do risk management and other HR functions. We were going to then bump up our half-time admin there and make that person into an HR generalist, which is sorely needed in that department. and we were going to add a part-time diversity recruitment coordinator, which we were told very clearly that from our task force, our racial and equity task force, would be a really helpful thing, and I believed it would be too, to be able to manage the affirmative action plan, which we do not have currently in town, which we would like to do and we're going to contract for, but to manage it every year because it's a document that needs to be updated every year, and to actually work on the recruitment for our community, for our town employees in the diversity field. So these are things, this really wasn't a huge, big ask, and I know it was mentioned by someone that, you know, we asked for 5 new employees and we got 4. That's true, we did ask for 5 employees, but to be very clear, we are still, even with this change, with the 1 additional person in HR, we would still be down 1 full head count from before we did the VRIP program. And so these were just strategic changes and moves around into the different departments in our town government to be able to offer our services much more efficiently and in a more productive manner. You're aware of the changes we made in engineering in the budget, the changes we made in some of the other departments, the change we added to the finance department. We're making a lot of different changes that we believe are benefiting our community at large. And obviously, again, I'll say, I know this is not the one that you're going to hear somebody talking about at the coffee shop. They're not going to be worrying, the average citizen's not going to be really worrying about our HR department. But it does matter to the men and women who work for our town. And the men and women who work for our town work really hard for our town. And they deserve to be supported by a department that supports them. I know that I did speak to the moderator prior to this, talking sort of about the process, and he said that the administration would present their proposal, and I told him that there were department heads who reached out to me to ask if they could speak at the meeting on this item, and he said it would be appropriate for them to speak during the I guess the administration presentation. So I know there are some department heads who are on who did ask me if they could have the opportunity to speak about how the HR department impacts them, and they are some of the largest users of the HR department because the size of their department. So I will just defer to you, Mr. Moderator. I know that you said this would be the appropriate time.
Yeah, sure. We'll just have, you know, maybe 2 minutes or less, hopefully less. Whoever wants to start, raise your hand. Or I know Mr. Hurley sent us an email if he wants to start.
All right.
I don't know if oh, okay.
Yeah. Here we go. Hi, thank you, Mr. Moderator. The purpose of this comment is to request the restoration of the human resources budget from a department head perspective. All town employees and management rely on the human resources to assist in internal issues that come up that may involve moderating potential promotions or disciplinary actions, assistance with Title VI, pay benefit questions and concerns. They provide assistance in hiring part-time and full-time employees. I am sure you know, but just in case some officials aren't aware, the town risk manager plays a key role in addressing and resolving potential claims to the town. This can be for personal injury or property damage claims. It could be in the form of contractor disputes, automotive damage claims, insurance issues, and they are the first point of contact. The office administers the health benefit claims, pension, and insurance. It provides assistance to the town employees, both active and retired. Overall, the human resources spent dozens to hundreds of hours over the past few years assisting the engineering department with personnel matters, playing a key role in hiring employees, posting the job openings, clarification of benefits, providing assistance to employees matters, healthcare, EAP, and other programs, and provide support administration to potential claims from, fallen trees, potholes, water damage, pedestrian issues, and as mentioned earlier, workers' compensation claims. So thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Hurley. I believe Chief McCarthy, you were next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator and members of the RTM for hearing the appeal. This letter is this is in support of restoration funding for the Human Resources Department. Over the past few years, I've been extremely frustrated and disappointed in the inadequate level of service that the fire department has received from HR, and I've made that my feelings known to the administration and certainly to Mr. Hazelkamp. As a department head of over 100 employees, I need the prompt, knowledgeable service from HR. Case in point, I spent 3 hours today with Mr. Hazelkamp on contract arbitration and several hours last week preparing for today. Those are hours that he cannot support other departments. So the amount of time that we demand of the HR department is pretty significant. Given the pressures of the HR department and risk management challenges in the recent past, they have not been able to service the municipal departments in the way that we need them to. And with the prospect of a new director replacing Mr. Hazelkamp and a new benefits manager potentially, I'm very concerned that services to the department will continue to degrade. Additionally, public safety departments, as the first selectwoman noted, are significantly challenged, and appropriately so, to improve gender and ethnic diversity. And these challenges require the expertise of HR support. Our employees, over 100 members of the department, as well as retirees, feel similarly frustrated and underserved as they make benefit and retirement decisions. The prospect of further reduced staff in the HR department will ripple through my operations in ways that will be disruptive and expensive and missed opportunities, grievances, litigation, and arbitration. The Fairfield Fire Department and our employees are internal customers of HR. The role of HR in my department is significant and mission critical in multiple ways. We need a robust and proactive HR in order for our department to function effectively and efficiently. Otherwise, there's opportunities missed and errors are made, and they will continue to occur. It is not often that the fire department or any department speaks in support of another department's budget restoration. I just am frustrated that Mr. Hazelkamp and his staff are required to triage requests for services from the departments. I think that it puts them at a significant disadvantage that they're having to make decisions every day on what requests for service they honor and which they ignore. And when they have to make those decisions, there's a lot of frustration that's built up in the department, and it contributes to issues like the current situation that we find ourselves in the fire department. We're going to contract arbitration instead of a fruitful and collaborative negotiations. So I would like to emphasize the fact that that the services that HR provides us help us do our job. None of the departments have adequate staffing or expertise to replace the services that we need from HR. They're specifically trained and have the legal background to support those issues in the fire department, and I'm sure in other departments. And we hope that you will recognize that level of service. And as the first select woman said, 500 employees townwide is a significant number of personnel that we really need from the support from HR. So I thank you and hope that you will support the administration's request for restoration.
Thank you, Chief McCarthy. Chief Calamaris, I believe you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you to the RTM members for
You're having microphone problems again.
Okay.
Up here, there you go. There you are.
Sound better?
Yep.
Okay, I apologize for that. Thank you again for letting me speak. I'm not going to belabor the issues. Chief McCarthy and previous speakers have touched on it. I have the largest department within the town as far as employees go, and we lean heavily on HR and what they provide for us. I probably, similar to the fire department, have the most issues with workers' compensation, FOIA requests, which go through risk management, payroll and differential contractual benefits that are afforded to not only our current employees, but also retirees, and then training as well, training for our employees, which was touched upon earlier. And as I said, not to belabor this, but I think the restoration of this department, the restoration of the money for this department should be put in place, and I'm all in favor of it, and I speak on behalf of of my entire organization and the people who are in it. When it comes to organizational culture, and I think if we, as the first select woman said, if we support the people who are not only our most important resource, but our most expensive resource. And if we're going to be cutting money in that area, it should come from somewhere else. It should not come from the Human Resources Department. So thank you for your time, and I'll cut it off there.
Thank you, Chief Calamaris. Mr. Basilio, I believe you are up.
Okay, can you hear me? Thank you,
Yes,
Mr.
sir. We can hear
Moderator.
you.
I don't want to go over the same ground that the first select woman and the two chiefs went over there. Spot on with their analysis of a department head who interfaces on a daily basis with the HR department. You know, one thing I've noticed is that I work with the police department and the fire department and the parks department and all other departments in town, and we work collaboratively when necessary. But the one department that really deals with every single department in town, every single employee in town, and their families, by the way, who are also impacted by the need for the services in that department, is the HR department. And I think that the services they provide are just vital to the well-being of all the employees and their families, as I said, and the retirees and their families. And I think it was short-sighted to eliminate this funding, and I advocate very highly that this department be fully funded in order to service and benefit and guide department heads and every other employee in the town, no matter what their status is. And I will close with that statement and really encourage you to refund this position. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Masilio. Ms. DeMarco, you're
Hi,
next.
everybody. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you about reinstating this position. Luckily, I talk fast. I know this is one of your longest nights of the year, so I can get through this quickly. I'm going to give a little bit of a different perspective on why this position is important to our department. We're a small department, so our HR needs are not as great as those other big departments. What we really rely on HR and risk management for is resident-focused services. So if there is a senior who falls through no fault of maintenance or something in the way, but falls, and that senior goes to the hospital and there's an ambulance involved, that's a risk management call. We do a very detailed report. We send that over to risk management. They work with the insurance and the family's insurance to be sure that they are heard and those needs are addressed. And that's an important piece of what risk management does, is make that family feel as though they matter. And that's, and I understand I'm sounding like a social worker, but so much of this is the person facing role of risk management. The other things, just for through COVID, the things we relied on risk management for were making sure that we were allowed to use our buses to transport nurses to bring vaccines and test kits to homebound residents. We needed to be sure that we could use our buses and our drivers to deliver meals to the residents in town who couldn't get there. And I understand that these are those heartstring stories, but those are some of the reasons we really needed risk management, was to be sure that that's something we can do. During a typical year, we get 10 to 12 seniors who are injured, and that's those, I talked about why risk management's involved there. But we also do things like snow shoveling for seniors, where we have volunteers go to seniors' homes to shovel, and that's a long process of getting those permission slips and waivers and applications approved to be sure that we don't put town at risk by having volunteers go to shovel. There's all sorts of these little things that don't pop up in your world because you hope that they're taken care of. Eliminating this position and eliminating risk management impacts every single department in different ways that you don't see. It's not just about the employees, it's about the way the town reacts and helps its residents. So I would hope that you would reconsider this cut, and I really do appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Marco. Mr. Cleary.
Hi, thank you very much. I'll keep it brief. I will not restate what's already been said, or I'll try not to. You've heard from small departments, you've heard from large departments. We're a mid-sized department with 50+ employees, and we utilize HR extensively. HR is already challenged to meet the demands that are placed upon it, and we make continuous and complex demands upon that department on a weekly basis. We are providing healthcare services in every single school, public and private, in the town, and we present complex, challenging issues to them on a regular basis. And any reductions going forward, I mean, they are challenged to meet the demands now, and reductions going forward raise concerns in me and my department for future levels of service to help us do our jobs well, to protect the town, to serve the residents the best we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cleary. I appreciate it. Let me just scan through the pages. I don't think anybody else has a hand up. I don't see anyone else in the chat. Did you want to finish anything, Madam First Selectwoman, or could we move on to the Madam Chairwoman of the BOF's response?
No, I just wanted to say that thank you, Mr. Moderator. I appreciate the department heads who took the time to request, actually, to me, if they could speak. I think it speaks a lot about how important this department is, and the fact that it's, again, not a, I like to say, sexy department that people, our average citizens, ever really come in contact with, except for that risk management piece that is so important. But it's very important to our town department heads, and sometimes you just got to take a little bit of time to ask some questions and learn a little bit more about the departments and how they work to better understand them. So thank you again for the time. Appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate all of the department heads for speaking. HR definitely, obviously, touches all of them. And it sounds like if you could do it all over again, you should have started with HR first and touched every other one afterwards. So, Madam Chairman of BOF, Lori Charlton.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Lori Charlton. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the body and respond to this appeal. I will respond to some of the comments made by the First Selectwoman and Mr. Hazelkamp and others. And I'll also share the rationale behind the budget adjustments passed by the Board of Finance. So before I start, I believe everyone on this body is aware that each of the budget adjustments under appeal this evening were passed by the Board of Finance majority on a split vote. So just for the record, any comments I make this evening, and if I use the words we or us or the Board of Finance for simplicity, I want to be clear that I'm not speaking on behalf of the entire board, but rather on behalf of the majority who voted for these budget items. I also want to thank First Selectwoman Kupchak, Mr. Hazelkamp, and others who spoke on behalf of the appeal. Your comments were certainly informative, and it was quite a bit more information than we had for our consideration in the budget process. Before I actually make my comments, I do feel like I need to state a couple of things for the record. If I were listening to some of the statements that were just made, I might be under the impression that the Board of Finance cut the risk manager or cut the budget for the risk manager. And that's not accurate. So, first of all, the risk manager was, preemptively terminated by the administration when the budget was released at the end of February. Secondly, as far as the budget, it is not reduced from last year. Last year's budget in total was $607,000. This year's budget request was $775,000, a 28% increase. The Board of Finance reduced it to $621,000, which is 2% up from last year. The payroll and Social Security amounts in last year's budget were $466,000. This year's budget request for payroll and Social Security was $613,000, a 32% increase. I know, so a 32% increase was proposed, but the Board of Finance reduced it to $494,000, which is actually 6% higher than last year. So I know the RTM members have all this detail available to them in their budget books, but I wanted to make sure the conversation is grounded in those facts and it's understood that the Board of Finance did not cut the budget as compared to last year. So the actions we did take on the budget included 2 cuts. The first one was small. It was $35,000 to eliminate double counting of license fees for timekeeping software. And I believe that was a unanimous vote. The second 2 adjustments were to reduce payroll and Social Security collectively by $119,000. Those are the adjustments that take budgeted payroll from the 32% increase to the 6% increase and are under appeal this evening. So let me speak to the majority's rationale for the reduction of that budget request. We've had, a number of individuals articulate here tonight the need for a better functioning HR department. I believe all of them. This is not new information. I've heard Mr. Hazelkamp on more than one occasion, including most recently during a budget hearing of this body, characterize the department as the worst HR department he's ever seen. Mr. Hazelkamp also wrote a letter to the Board of Finance prior to our budget vote, and these are his words. The department suffers from severe inadequacies. Systems that should work either don't or need a substantial overhaul. Proper HR functions are hindered because of the current MASH unit exercise where systems, union contracts, and lack of accountability have created a department whose primary focus is transactional, not strategic. This applies to almost all HR areas: benefits, employee relations, risk management, and recruitment. In his letter, he attributes all of this, and I quote, to years of neglect, incompetence, and lack of resources. So those are strong words, and they're disturbing, particularly, I assume, if you work in the department. Mr. Hazelkamp, made that assessment about an HR department that he's been leading for more than 2 years now, and that he's recently announced his resignation from. And I'm not here to dispute Mr. Hazelkamp's assessment of his department. I have no basis to do that. And it is not the Board of Finance's role to make that evaluation. And it's not our role to decide how the department should be structured. It is our role to evaluate the budget, particularly additions to administrative headcount that have an ongoing cost. And we did that. And as the first selectwoman said earlier, on a net basis, there were 5 new FTEs proposed in her budget. And we evaluated all of them and we approved 4 of the 5. We did not approve the increase in the HR headcount, and not because we don't believe there are issues. We do. Or because we have our own view about how the department should be structured. Not our role. Our role as it relates to this item was to determine whether it's reasonable to approve a budget with an organizational change and a 32% increase in payroll that the current HR leader is presenting on his way out and will not own. Our judgment, and I did share this concern personally with the first selectwoman, was that the priority should be hiring a new leader, and he or she, the person that will own it, and who will be accountable for the success or failure of this department, should have an opportunity, and most crucially, time to come in, assess the department, the structure, the systems, and the people before a reorganization is implemented and funded. This budget request, which from a pure resource perspective asks for 1 additional head, including half a head for the DEI coordinator, has been put forth as the solution to a multitude of problems. And it will be great if that level of additional resource is what's needed to solve the entire range of issues that have been discussed. And perhaps it is. But we were not ready to fund the additional headcount for several reasons. Above all else, we need leadership in the department. We're about to have a change. And for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, we believe that leader should be in place and have time to determine if this reorganization that will cost the town more money and that they will be accountable for is the right approach. Secondly, this is currently a 5-person department, really 4, plus a part-time clerk. And particularly because it's a small department, the leadership has an outsized role in the department's success or failure. The background and skill set of the person who's brought in to run it can have an impact on the department's other needs and potentially its structure and the skill set of the other people who would ideally be hired in a reorganization. Third, there's not one structure for a municipal HR department. Mr. Hazelkamp alluded to it, but as part of our budget diligence, we looked at budget documents for Connecticut towns and cities similar in size to Fairfield, specifically every town with a population between 50 and 70,000 people. And there's no typical structure. Every single one was different, not only in terms of size and roles, but in terms of functions. Some towns have multiple payroll people in HR. Some have none, they're in finance. Some have IT personnel in the department. West Hartford has 2 full-time risk management roles in HR. We don't even think we need 1 full-time role. Some have more active pension plans they support. We've frozen several of our plans and are pursuing a path to outsource our pension administration. Some have full-time roles dedicated to performance management or labor relations. It's all over the lot. And I'm not suggesting that any of that is right or wrong for Fairfield. Again, not my role. It simply gets back to the previous judgment we made, that structures can take a lot of different forms depending on how you want to support your strategic and operational objectives. And before we fund a decision that restructures and expands the size of the department, we should have permanent leadership in place. Fourth point, from looking at that benchmarking, there's been a case made that we are severely under-resourced, but Fairfield is actually not at all an outlier compared to other towns our size. On the high side, Greenwich is an outlier. They have 15 people in their HR department and a $3.2 million budget. West Hartford, who has the 2 full-time risk management people, has 7 FTEs. But the median size of HR departments across the other towns, our size, was 4 people, and the average budget was smaller. So we may in fact be under-resourced, but we did not believe we got a compelling case that the issues we have are all about quantity of resources. The last point I'll make about this budget request is on metrics and accountability. So I might be the only person who finds it interesting to look at other towns' budgets, but it is an interesting exercise. And a best practice, you can see in a lot of town budgets and in departmental budgets, including HR departments, is metrics. Budget requests are accompanied by goals that will be achieved, and the progress on achieving prior year goals is reported. Things like implementing new systems, updating employee handbooks, timely and successfully negotiating collective bargaining agreements, developing diversity programs, and so on. Measurable goals and accomplishments are important to lay out, especially when you're requesting additional funding in a budget. And we didn't get any of that. We got a rationale that, a mess was inherited and the department is dysfunctional, and the initiatives that were supposed to get achieved over the last 2 years weren't able to be achieved. And, everyone's working really hard and more resources are needed. And, that's a tough ask. I mean, this town has generally never done a great job of formally measuring accountability in our budget. But in some of the other areas where the Board of Finance did approve new headcount, particularly in community-facing roles like police officers and the senior center, there was more compelling support for the ask. So there's a judgment here. And unlike the judgment for every other headcount addition that we did approve, those that had a cogent analysis to support them, we didn't get that information here. And for that reason, the Board of Finance majority felt that we could not support the increased ask at this time. So, Mr. Moderator, I could say more, but in the interest of time, I do want to wrap up by saying that, like everyone else on the Board of Finance and the RTM, I care deeply and am personally invested in the town's success. And I very much want to see the employees who work for this town have the support they deserve in carrying out the work they do on behalf of all of us and in their own careers. I want to see them have contracts settled. They all deserve that. So I look forward to seeing our HR department get a fresh start to help that happen. So I will leave it at that, and I'll remain available if there are questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I will now open it up to the RTM, the body of the RTM, and believe Representative Bastilli, you were first in line.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Through you to Mr. Hazelkamp. I was wondering, in the 2 years that you have served as HR director, what measurements of metrics and accountability and effectiveness that have you put in place, like in the 2 years that you were there, and do any of those measurements point to why you would need this additional role? Like, do we have metrics for the HR department?
That would typically require data. And that's one of the single biggest challenges that we face, which is systems that are in need of a reboot so that you would have meaningful data out of the system. So.
But there's no strategic goals? Like, how like when you do performance management and you meet with people at the beginning of the year and you say, these are my strategic goals for you for the year, and they're subjective. We don't have those either.
Our primary objective is to try to get out accurate payroll, which is an incredibly challenging exercise out of our department. That's a function of many factors, some of which is poor labor relations over the years, so that contracts are so convoluted that the staff has to spend enormous time trying to figure out what the contracts even mean. So the answer to the question is, I'm not going to dissect the department's failures or challenges. Certainly since I've been there, we've taken on, and we had paper applications when I got there. So we put in an applicant tracking system that's online so that applications can be taken and sent to the departments electronically. We've now purchased testing software so that we can test applicants and train them internally. So the focus has primarily been on the contract negotiations that have occurred, the 2 projects that I just outlined, and COVID during the last 2 years. And that's been the focus of the department.
Okay, and then in terms of full-time headcount, I'm looking at like some back of envelope calculations that we did on the VRIP. And so right now we are approving, so the Board of Finance has approved 4 of the 5 full-time headcount increases that were requested in the original budget that came from the First Selectwoman's office. And just let me know if this is correct. We had in the VRIP in the end, we had 4 early retirements and 13 normal retirements. Is that correct?
I'll take you at your word. I don't have that in front of me, so.
Yeah, this is the back of envelopes stuff that I have. So I'm basing it on this. If anyone can chime in, then please let me know. But what I'm looking at we had 4 early retirements, 13 normal retirements. So really 4 early retirements. So a reduction in headcount of 4 at a cost of 4.664 million total for all the retirements. And then if we're down in that, then in the end, we're only down 1 FTE. So it's cost us 4.664 million to be down 1 FTE. If my connecting the dots is correct.
I'm sorry, is that a question about my budget? I got a little lost there.
Well, it's a question because it does tie to overall full-time employees. And since you're the HR director, I would imagine you have to know how many full-time FTEs we have.
Well, I'm not the budget person, so I'm speaking to my budget. I don't know what the net increase to the town was for headcount.
Okay, so the
Somebody
HR
else will know. I
director
don't.
doesn't have the total number of FTEs for the town.
That's not what the question was.
Well, if we're adding 1 more headcount, then that brings us back to the same number of heads that we had before, and we've already paid 4.664 million in early retirement, according to the calculations that I'm looking at. So that was my question. You don't have those calculations.
My response is I'm involved in my budget. I'm not involved in the overall budget to know what the net headcount increase was. I certainly know what the headcount is. I don't know what the budget changed that for.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bastilli. Representative Georgiadis?
Drew Georgiadis, District 9. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. To you, Mr. Hazelkamp, to follow up on Ms. Bastilli's comment, my question was similar. When you first started here, the RTM, you came to us for a contract negotiation for as we call the VERIP, which is the voluntary early retirement, initially requesting $20 million, but you withdrew that. And ultimately, we passed a $4.6 million VERIP to support you and the First Selectwoman in their desire to modernize. So my question is, you said you didn't remember when Ms. Pastilli, Representative Pastilli asked you, but you were the person who came to us, and this was supposed to jumpstart the reorganization of your HR department, and the justification was a reduction in staff total headcount. So you're now saying that the HR department is dysfunctional, according to the letter you sent to the Board of Finance. So would you say that this voluntary early retirement, the $4.6 million that we allocated in unfunded pension liabilities, did not produce what you were hoping it would produce at the time when you requested it from us 2 years ago?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Would you like me to repeat what I just asked?
Well, you broke up at the end, but I think I know that I can respond because your premise isn't correct. The VERIP had nothing to do with any reorganization in my department. One had nothing to do with the other. I don't.
Yeah, you presented. Okay.
I presented it because I negotiated it. Yes.
initially prior to talking to auditors, right? But that's okay, Mr. Hazelkamp. Never mind.
Well, that's
Thank you.
not correct. Well, that's not correct.
Okay, let's move on to Representative Spolier, please. Thank you, Representative Georgiadis.
Hi, Marcy Spolier, District 4. I have two things just to comment on. The first is just regarding the part-time diversity recruitment coordinator. As many of you should know, I worked on a resolution to declare racism as a public health crisis, and I interacted with many, as you can guess, I've interacted with many of the members from the Racial Equity and Justice Task Force. And in speaking to them, I think that they were looking for a more broader position than just the recruitment coordinator. And I think that one of the reasons we as an RTM approved funds for a consultant, a DEI consultant using our ARPA funds, is to find out what we really need in the town. And it's broader. It's broader than just a recruitment position. We may need somebody to help encourage that, but I think that we need that consultant to find out for us and to really dig in and find out where we can put our money to give our residents and to make our town more diversified for all. So I don't think that that's what the committee was asking for. And I think that given that we are getting a new HR department head and given the fact that we're getting a consultant, the DEI consultant, I don't think this year is the time to put that in the budget. I think next year might be the time, and next year might be the time to add other positions throughout our town to encourage and promote diversity in our town. But I don't think this is the year to do it. And secondly, I just also want to comment on the risk manager position that was brought up by many of our directors. And I'm just very concerned that this the person in this position was already let go. Mr. Hazelkamp, can you tell me how long that position has been vacant?
I don't, 6 weeks probably. I'm going off the top of my head. Certainly 4 to 6 weeks.
I mean,
Whenever
in
the
listening to our department.
I'm sorry, when the budget
Listening to our
is released.
department, and listening to our department heads, our first select woman and Mr. Hazelkamp, it very much concerns me that we do not have somebody in that position for 6 weeks. That was a presumptuous way to let the person go. And I just think we need to clarify that that person was not let go by the Board of Finance. That position is still in our current budget. It was in our past budget, and it'll still be there. And I very much agree with our chair of the Board of Finance that we need to get our department head in place and figure out what is needed before we start changing things up. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Spolier. Representative Ruggiero?
Hi, Amy Ruggiero, District 1. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Through you to Mrs. Charlton, I'd like to ask, one of the points you used about not approving the position was that we were going to have a change of leadership. And I just want to understand the thinking on how the Board of Finance, the people that voted for the $2.5 million increase in the Board of Ed, how did they get comfortable with that increase when they were having a change of leadership with the superintendent as well as the HR leader for the schools?
Is that directed to me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that question. So I guess my answer is I just don't think it's a very compelling comparison. We are, as I mentioned, we're talking about a 5-person department, or 4 people plus the clerk is what we have now. That is very different from a school district with 1,500 people in it. The school district has a much more robust and decentralized process to get feedback in terms of initiatives and structure. They've had audits done. And, and most critically, they have a Board of Education who, vets those decisions and pursues strategic initiatives based on long-term district improvement plans. So it's very, very different in my opinion. And I just, as I said, for a small department, you can have a leader, depending on what their skill set is and what they bring to a table. Maybe that person has a risk management background, for example, or they're an attorney. Their own skill set can have a very significant impact on who else they need in their department. So I just don't think that's a reasonable comparison between the two. So I guess that would be my answer. Thank you.
I'd like to ask you, since you brought up an audit, I actually asked for an audit last year of the Board of Ed. Can you tell me when the last time that occurred?
I don't know the answer to that.
Point of order, Mr.
You're
Moderator, is
referencing,
this
though,
point
that
of
it's
order, Mr.
relevant.
Moderator? This doesn't relate to the item before us.
Representative Ruggiero, what is your question about? We're going to be hitting the Board of Ed later tonight, so don't know the relevance of this at this point, this question.
I'll withdraw the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Ruggiero. Representative Steele?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jeff Steele, District 2. I'm just going to make a comment. We've heard an appeal from the first Selectwoman, Mr. Hazelkamp, but we also heard from half a dozen department heads, from social services to police to fire, and how important the Human Resources Department is, not just to the Human Resource Department, but to their departments and to functioning within their departments and carrying out the duties and responsibilities that they have for the people who live in this town. So, it sounds to me, I've heard some very compelling reasons, like very good reasons why we need to keep this department intact, because it does affect their work. It does affect their departments. And I think it's important to think about that before we vote on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Steele. Representative Zeslin.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Liz Ezema, District 4, through you to Mr. Hazelkamp. Jim, first of all, thank you for sending the information that was requested. I appreciate that. Number 2, could you tell us, I realize you're not going to be staying on in your position, but I think especially to Mr. Steele's point, a little more thought should have been put into letting our risk manager go. And I say to his point because he's talking about, a thoughtful examination of headcount and who does what. In your mind, what percentage of a person's time would need to be devoted to risk management if it were not a full-time position?
I'm not sure I understand your question, but so I think that the risk management function, the reason I added the assistant director in lieu of the risk management function is I thought there was some capacity there that would have benefited the department. People are raising issues about the departure of the risk manager. It is a horrible HR practice to announce in a budget that a position has been eliminated and leave the person working in the organization. So for those folks that have raised issues with that, you just talk to you talk to any company who's going to say, oh yeah, we're going to let you go next year. You just don't do that. So I understand that people might have been upset by that, but once the budget was going to come out, are you supposed to leave the person in place whose position has been cut? That's just not a good practice. And that's why it was handled the way it was. So, the risk management function, it's like everything else. It ebbs and flows depending on season. We have dozens of insurance policies that get managed by the risk manager. And that's a big challenge administratively to keep those in place. It's the workers' comp is a big issue in our town. He's supposed to develop the safety programs that are deployed to the departments to assist them in hoping that we mitigate risk. There's not I'm not sitting here and I didn't advocate the elimination of the risk management function. It's just the position that was cut is certainly going to assume the risk management function. So the net effect is that the other two positions that are in the budget will go. There's just no way around that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And as I'm looking at the job description, I just see a bullet point that says Assist Human Resources Director, Benefits Manager, and Risk Manager. So I was trying to understand that this person is either performing risk management duties or there is a risk manager they are assisting.
You know, they will be the risk manager. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah, that's the role they will, that's the role they will do as a primary function. You know, the risk manager will have additional responsibilities, most likely in the employee labor relations side of the equation. But there's plenty of work to do.
Okay, well, I appreciate your comments, and from what you're saying, as far as what that person handles, I think it was an extremely irresponsible and huge risk to take. I understand it was not your decision to let this person go, and we have been 6 weeks without that person. And from what you've said, this really puts us, I think, in a very difficult and perhaps risky position. So thank you, Jim. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Hazelkamp and Representative Zesma. Let's see, we got Representative Horton.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Margaret Horton, District 9. Thank you to everyone who's presented and the department heads. I think that in general, a case has absolutely been made for why we need a robust human resource department, and I don't think anyone would disagree with that. What I'm struggling to understand, and perhaps Mr. Hazelkamp can answer this, is, you know, where's the data to support, or what will support that we can know that the problem would be solved with this amount of money? Because it feels that there's disagreement around, is it a systems issue? Because it also seems everyone is in disagreement that the department is dysfunctional. So, you know, is it a systems issue or is it a money issue? You know, I don't think the case has been made specifically to understand why this money. I'm concerned that it's really looking at, you know, throwing money at the problem versus understanding the problem itself.
Sure. So, you know, throwing money at it, the salary dollars for the risk manager are the same dollars that we have in for the assistant director. So that wasn't where the money got put in. The money got put in by creating two ancillary positions, one which was the affirmative action officer and the moving the part-time admin to an HR generalist. It wasn't that's where the change was made. There was really no change in functionality on the risk management side. It just so happens that the cut that was implemented links out to the salary for the assistant director, as it was the same salary for the risk manager. So, you know, the net effect was not to, you know, in my view, the net effect was to reduce and get rid of the affirmative action recruitment specialist and the HR generalist. And I just have to say one thing on this whole issue. I absolutely know more than, and you all know it too, we have no diversity in our workforce. There's very little diversity. I've talked about it since I've been here. So the notion that we should delay an effort to hire somebody to help develop an affirmative action plan, monitor the affirmative action plan, and assist in diversifying the workforce, I just don't understand that kind of statement, when I believe that whoever comes in, that would be something that everybody would want as a goal, would be to have somebody take those efforts and move that forward, because it's so painfully obvious that we don't have a diverse workforce.
To be clear, I didn't say that I didn't want that as part of the Human Resources Department.
Oh, yeah.
What I asked was, you know, to understand how this was specifically about the staffing of the department versus how the department itself functions. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I know, and I apologize. I didn't mean actually that you said that. Somebody else had referenced the issue of the DEI. Look, I'm just going to say the following, which is the issues are multifaceted. Some of them are resource driven. Some of them are, in my view, there needs to be a reinstall of the Munis system, and some of it is driven by the union contracts. Those three things create enormous complexities in our office that really make the office very transactional. And until those are all dealt with, the department, in my view, will be challenged. There's a need for resources because I would argue the reverse. If you give resources and then there's not an accountability, then shame on who's ever the next director. And, to the point, I forgot who made the point about, should there be metrics to evaluate the staff and the HR department? Yes, there should be. That requires systems and data, but yes, there should be statistics that show how long it takes to hire somebody, how long it takes to orient someone. All those statistics should be done. Right now, it's like a triage exercise. It's like a MASH unit where all we're doing is running around dealing with transactions. And that's, I think, unfortunate.
Thank you, Mr. Hazelkamp and Representative Horton. Representative Astorita?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ken Astorita, District 10. My question is for the head of the Board of Finance. Did she or did any other members of the Board of Finance speak to Mr. Hazelkamp before making the decision to cut the $118,000 from his budget?
We only heard from Mr. Hazelkamp during the budget hearings, and we spoke directly to the first selectwoman. So did I, go and have coffee and a personal conversation with him? No, I did
so
not.
the answer to that is no. So you didn't. So you didn't chat with him before trying to understand his rationale before making the cut. Is that correct?
Well, what's correct is that budget presentations were put before us and we asked questions and the departments offered up their rationale. And prior to the vote, I met with the first selectwoman along with the vice chair of the Board of Finance to express these concerns to her. And what I got back in response to that was a letter for Mr. Hazelkamp. Actually, it was a letter to the entire Board of Finance, which laid out his reasons and rationale. So no, we did not connect personally beyond that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, Representative Astorita. Representative Iacono?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just wanted to comment on a couple of things I heard. First of all, in her defense of the majority on the Board of Finance cutting this role, the chairwoman of the Board of Finance conceded that it's not their role to question the needs of the department. Yet they found it to be their role to cut $118,000, which, in my opinion, is simply setting up the next person for failure. We all know that this department is understaffed. We all know that there are deficiencies in the department. We've now heard from the department heads, which, by the way, I've been on this body for 15 years. I don't think I've ever seen department heads come on for other department heads and ask us to support an appeal. We've all heard from the users of this system that it's woefully deficient. Albeit it was a long time ago when I worked in the industry, but I'm a former HR professional. I don't know, and I have never understood how this town has functioned without an HR generalist. I was thrilled when that change was made and put into the budget. It's been a long time coming. That's what was cut, an HR generalist position. I don't know how we don't have one, and it makes very logical sense to me to know why the department is dysfunctional not having one. Secondly, I don't understand why we're cutting a recruiter. With the labor market the way that it is, why would you turn down an opportunity to have somebody come in and help us build a better labor force, and one that can help us diversify at the same time? This entire cut at the Board of Finance level for $118,000 really, truly, to me, feels like it was a means to get to a number. I can't tell you how disappointing that is, knowing all the work that we did as an RTM on BRIP. We all heard, we all questioned.
Point of order, Mr. Moderator.
For
Does
a
this
long
have to do
time.
to this item?
It has to do with the reinstating of these two positions and the rationale for why it needs to go back. The VRIP program we all heard and we all questioned. We wanted things from that, all of us, each of us, in a bipartisan fashion. Job descriptions, data, analysis, understanding. We didn't get any of it because it doesn't exist, because the department doesn't have the staff to do it. We all want these things, yet we are on the precipice here of being able to reinstate money to get us the things that we actually want and have demanded. I don't understand why this wouldn't be a bipartisan support to put this back. This does not need to be a political decision. Appeals are bipartisan. They've been made in the past. They have been supported
Point of
bipartisanly.
order, Mr. Moderator. Is
And
there
I
a question
really,
here?
and I
Point of
would
order.
really like to
Mr.
hear
Moderator, is
that
this a
this
question? Because this is
position
not
will be,
political.
I would really
Please,
like to hear that this
Representative Iacono,
position will
please
be
get to the point.
supported. My point is, we've all asked for things in this HR department. My point is, we've all asked and need things. The department heads have come on and said that they
Point
need
of
things.
order. It's not to make points. It's to ask questions, Mr. Moderator.
Point of order. She has every
Respectfully,
right
it's
to make a
exactly
comment.
to make points. That's exactly our role, and I don't even know where that's coming from. Secondly, it's undersourced. If we're going to move ourselves into the 21st century, we really need to do that, people. We really need to. I really encourage you to support this. I think that there might have just been a little bit of a misunderstanding over there at the Board of Finance. They were trying to get to a means to an end. I think if they had had a little bit more information that they had heard tonight, that maybe it wouldn't have gone that way, over $118,000. And I don't think it's unreasonable for all of us to support having an HR generalist and an HR recruiter. They're basic functions of an HR department. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Iacono. I will say in my time on this body, this wouldn't be the first time that cuts were made to get to a number. Representative Pistilli, you spoke once already, so this is your second time.
Mine's really quick, Mr. Moderator. Through Sharon Pistilli, District 3, through you, Mr. Moderator, to Madam First Selectwoman. Madam First Selectwoman, when you needed to add the Chief Administrative Officer, what was the process that we followed for that when you needed to add somebody?
I added the Chief Administrative Officer after I assumed office before my first budget. And I went before the Board of Finance and requested a transfer from two departments that had unfilled positions for quite some time apparently, to pay for that position until the next budget was then presented, so that I could then include it in the budget as a regular budgeted item.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Moderator, through you to Madam Chairwoman of the Board of Finance. Ms. Charlton, if we end up needing an additional role in HR, could Madam First Selectwoman come before you and ask for an emergency, moving of funds from one area to another? If when we receive a new HR director, we know that person's skills, we know how much risk management experience they have or do not have, therefore know how to flesh out a very small department. Could she come before you and ask for funds for another HR position in her group, in that person's group?
Thank you, Representative Pistilli. Yes, that's the process. What I did say earlier was that, I think it's important that when someone comes in, they have an opportunity to evaluate the department and the people and the structures. I think any of us who have taken on new leadership roles in our lives know that you don't just walk in on day one and have a solution for things. So when that person comes in and they have an opportunity to do that, and they, set forth what they want to accomplish with the department in terms of structures and goals, then sure, why not? That would be an appropriate time to come back.
Okay, so I just wanted to add that Ms. Charlton comes from a professional services background, and so do I. I have 23 years of HR consulting experience, and I would agree the best approach here is to see the talents of the person that we bring in and the people that are hired under them fill in the gaps. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, if I could just follow up on that. So just to be clear, Representative Fiscal was asking about the process I used to transfer funds. Now, that was a unique situation because there were positions that were budgeted for a period of years that weren't filled under the prior administration. It was a strange practice, but it existed. That is not the case under my administration over the last 3 years. We have positions that are filled. We don't run positions that remain unfilled for a number of years. And frankly, I would contend that I've run a small business for over 35 years. I know how to staff things and I know how to manage things. And when a department says that they're having difficulty managing their department because they need more staff, it's not a really hard thing to understand. And again, I just would reiterate what was been said before, that we are adding a half-time person to an already half-time position in the department to fulfill a position that Mr. Hazelkamp, who has 37 years of HR experience, believes an HR generalist is needed in the department, and to add a diversity coordinator, which I feel is very important for a number of reasons, and I've explained that during this very long budget process. So again, it's $118,000 in a budget that's over $300 million, and it's vitally important to our town's function. And as this was said, we've had department heads who asked to be able to speak. They've asked the RTM to support restoring this position because they feel it's important for the employees who work hard every single day for the residents of our town. So I'm humbly asking you to please consider restoring this very small amount that will have a huge impact. And the next HR director is going to be very, very happy because this budget is for all of 2023. Will have an opportunity to organize that department in any way they want with an additional small amount of money of $118,000 to be able to do a good job for the employees, the good men and women who work for the town of Fairfield. So I'm really and truly asking you to please take this appeal in full consideration. Thank you, Mr.
Madam
Moderator.
First Selectwoman. I would like to move to public comment. If anybody in the public would like to comment, please put your name in the chat.
Seeking the chat function. Here it is. I'm a Zoom guy. I'll put it in the chat. Hold on.
All right, I don't see anybody. We can go back to the body, but I think we've exhausted all our opinion. David Cooper, you would like to comment. You have 2 minutes. We don't respond to you, so state your case, your name and your address.
Sure, I'll be very brief. I'm sorry for the somewhat poor connection. I'm actually in a car in Pennsylvania, so I hope it persists, but it will promote a spirit of succinctness and brevity. My name is David Cooper. My family and I live at 324 Mine Hill Road in Greenfield Hill. We moved to Fairfield in the last 12 months from Westport, where we lived for the prior 9 years. We moved for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons we moved was we perceived that Fairfield was a better run, frankly, more fiscally responsible town. And so I am here to express support for the first select woman's plan for how the budget should be submitted and move forward. My basic opinion is I recognize we have needs, and I respect there are always needs to increase funding in certain departments of the town. But I urge us to find a different way to do that. I think that we are likely to all be facing continued inflation pressure, lots of sort of issues with the economy coming in the next 6 to 12 months. And
Mr. Cooper, I hate to cut you off, but are you commenting on the budget overall? Because we're not even in that meeting yet, sir. We are still in a special meeting.
Novice I am. I was commenting on that, so I apologize. Yes.
Yeah, we unfortunately haven't gotten there yet. We're still in our appeals meeting.
My bad.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper.
If you'd like to come back, that would be great. It may be probably in an hour or so.
I will try to check back in if I'm not stuck in the Garden State Parkway. I apologize for my error.
It's not your fault. I appreciate it. I'm sorry.
Thank you for the effort.
Okay, so like I said, we're going to take it back to the body, but I would say we seem pretty much cooked there. So Betsy, I think we'll probably need a roll call vote.
Mr. Moderator, I do have a comment.
I'm sorry, who are you?
This is Liz Azima. I'm in the chat.
You just wrote it. Okay, it came in after I already
Okay, duly noted.
closed the discussion. Sorry.
Ed Bateson,
Yes.
Melissa Longo,
Yes.
Marty Fury, Amy Ruggiero,
Yes.
Yes.
Karen McCormick.
I think Marty answered at the same time as me.
Yes, I got her. Thank you.
Okay, sorry.
Good job, Betsy.
Karen McCormick,
Yes.
Cindy Perham,
No.
Jeff Steele,
Yes.
Alex Durrell,
Yes.
Jeff Geldenzi,
No.
Tom Lambert,
No.
Sharon Pastilli,
No.
Laura Carson,
No.
Alice Kelly,
No.
Marcy Spalier,
No.
Liz Esma,
No.
Will Diaz,
No.
Josh Garskoff,
No.
Joe Siebert,
No.
Jay Wolk,
No.
Steve Barretts,
No.
Hannah Gale, Hannah Gale, Andy Graceffa,
No.
Lisa Havey,
No.
John Kuhn,
No.
Mark McDermott,
No.
Jill Vergara,
No.
Karen Wackerman,
No.
Hank Ferentz,
Yes.
Pamela Iacono,
Yes.
Christine Messina,
Yes.
Peter Tallman,
Yes.
Christine Brown,
No.
Drew Georgiadis,
No.
Margaret Horton,
No.
Kelly Cinto,
Yes.
Ken Estorita,
Yes.
Peter Britton,
Yes.
Frank Patisse,
Yes.
Story Tolman.
Yes.
Seventeen in favor, 22 opposed.
Motion fails. All right, item number 3 is to hear and consider an appeal by the first Selectwoman and Director of Human Resources from the following vote of the Board of Finance pertaining to HR 1330 budget to eliminate risk management account 58920, request to restore $500,000, requested account 58920, $850,000. Board of Finance approved 0. Can I have a motion to approve? Representative Woke, seconded by Representative Zesma. Madam First Selectwoman and Mr. Hazelkamp, the floor is yours.
Mr. Moderator, this is Jared Schmidt, CFO. I'll be doing the presentation on this appeal.
Okay, Jared. Appeal away.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. Just to get some basics out of the way, the appropriation for this item, the risk management item, was $850,000. This is the largest in dollar amount of the appeals, and the entire amount, the entire $850,000 was eliminated from the budget. So this is our approach on the town side for determining how much this is we look at all the outstanding cases, legal cases against the town, and we attempt to discern how much money is going to be needed to, on the town side, to settle these cases over the next, over that fiscal year. And that's our approach. Today, I haven't really heard anybody criticize that. And I think the reason for the cut in this account was that the balance in the internal service fund, which this is a part of, has grown too big. We acknowledge that there may be some funding in there in the internal service fund that could be reduced, and that's why our proposal to this is not to restore the entire $850,000, but to restore $500,000 of it. There's been a lot of, many people have opined on this and what it might do, what the consequences might be. A lot of the discussion has revolved around credit rating agencies and how they will view this kind of cut. I don't think anybody knows for sure. What we know is that in the past, when we were underfunded in the internal service fund, that in almost all cases, I'm told, when we met with the credit rating agencies, this was the primary question that they asked and expressed concern about how woefully funded the fund was. I also know that credit rating agencies don't like to see dramatic changes like this in a budget, and has the potential to spawn questions from the credit rating agencies. So on the face of it now, let's cut to today. On the face of it now, it looks like the fund is in pretty good shape. There's a $6 million fund balance, and it appears to be doing well. What the caution that I would throw out there at this point is that that has grown. And if you look at it, I submitted to the RTM earlier today some detailed information about the Internal Service Fund. And one of the things you'll see is that of that $6 million in fund balance, $5 million of it has occurred over the last 2 years. And the reason for that is because of COVID. We had people not going to the doctor. We had people also not, legal cases not being allowed in our courts because of the COVID restrictions. And so we weren't spending as much money. Yet the revenue was still there. We were still putting the money into it. That has caused this to grow. So that's the explanation for where it is now. My biggest concern is going forward is that these are unprecedented times, and the dynamics of what's going on between the legal cases, between medical visits, people are starting to go back to the doctor. We know that. We heard from our medical consultant when we were setting the budget for our medical costs, and we increased the costs, rightfully so. I don't think anybody has any idea really whether or not that's going to be enough, given the unprecedented times that we're in and how quickly people are going to go back. What happened over those 2 years to people and what kind of conditions they may have developed that may have to get treated, we don't know. And so to pick this time, this unprecedented time really in our history, to eliminate $850,000, the entire amount of the risk management piece, I don't understand it. I don't get it. And I know that the chairwoman of the Board of Finance and also other members of the Board of Finance, when we had this discussion in the board meeting about this, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but there was some acknowledgement that they don't really know how much should be put in here or how much the fund balance should be. And so I don't know how you make the jump from saying, I don't know what should be in it, and I don't know where it should be, to saying, let's cut $850,000 out of this. It just doesn't make sense to me. I'm also concerned about what happens in the future, and I have no indication from, we will obviously put forth another budget next year, and we'll put forth in the risk management and other items in the Internal Service Fund what we think is necessary. I don't know where the Board of Finance stands now. So there are two things that are possible. You could, number one, restore this funding to $850,000 or something, maybe something less than that. Or you could not. You could not restore the money, and you could continue to do zero funding for risk management. In either case, if you restore it, well, by this cut that's in there now, you're creating a cliff in the budget. So while it may seem like we're saving money today, you have to find that money somewhere next year, if that's the path you choose. If you choose not to fund it, well, then I have real concerns about what the credit rating agencies are going to say, because now you're starting to show a pattern of what your approach is going to be to this fund. And when this was underfunded, the rating agencies, as I mentioned, did not like that. And I'll just point out one more thing that does show up in the details of the fund and what I presented to you earlier today. There was one of the documents that's entitled Risk Management Details. And within there, you'll see over the history of the amount that has gone into the fund and the amount that's been expended, the revenues are not keeping up with the expenses. So although we're seeing in general in the internal service fund an increase, I would say two things. Number one, again, it's because of COVID. And number two, it's because other things are helping to support and supplement what's happening in the risk management aspect of the fund. Because since 2011, the discrepancy between the revenues and expenses has been about $2 million. So we're here and we're asking that the RTM consider restoring $500,000 so that we can avoid any potential for scrutiny by the rating agencies or avoid what would be a cliff in the budget, both of which are just bad. There's not much, I can't think of anything good about this cut. So I'd ask you to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Madam Chairwoman Charlton?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you, Mr. Schmidt. We had a robust discussion about this during the Board of Finance budget vote meeting, and it was actually suggested to me by more than one member of the public who watched that hearing that I write down the rationale for this budget cut to make it more understandable to the public. So I actually have a couple of slides that I'd like to use to guide the discussion. And so as to avoid myself fumbling through them, I asked Mr. Galdenzi if he wouldn't mind doing that for me and sharing them on the screen. Okay. Thanks, Mr. Galdenzi. Okay, so just to, just to level set this perhaps for the public or anyone that doesn't understand the pieces of this, the amount that's budgeted for risk management every year in our budget is transferred to the Internal Service Fund. And it's accounted for that way because unlike the general fund, the appropriations in the Internal Service Fund don't expire at the end of the fiscal year. They can remain there until claims are paid. So if the town gets sued and the town attorney estimates that we're going to pay an insurance deductible of $100,000 on that lawsuit, that $100,000 is reserved for now, and the money put aside for that can sit in the Internal Service Fund regardless of how long it takes to settle the claim. Estimates for claim settlements on all litigation that's been identified are provided by the town attorney to the town to develop the budget and are reviewed by the Board of Finance annually. This year, the budget that came before us was $850,000, and we did reduce it to zero. We didn't do that because there are no claims outstanding. There are. We cut the budget because the Internal Service Fund already had adequate reserves to cover the town attorney's estimates for all existing claims. And on top of that, it had a $6 million fund balance, a cushion. Can you advance a slide, please? Okay, so let's talk about the Internal Service Fund because this can introduce some confusion into the equation. We don't just use the Internal Service Fund to account for the risk management budget and future litigation settlements. It's also used to account for workers' compensation claims and self-insured medical claims for the town side of the budget. And it's used for those budgets for the same reason. Workers' comp claims are long-term in nature, so you don't want your appropriations to expire. And medical claims are not long-term, but there can be a short-term lag at year-end while claims are processing, so you want to be able to record a liability for those. Workers' comp and medical are budgeted separately from risk management. They don't have anything to do with the $850,000 per se. The budget for workers' comp was $1.5 million or so, and the budget for medical was, I believe, about $11 million in the budget. But all those items go into the Internal Service Fund together. The litigation piece, the workers' comp, and the medical. They go into the Internal Service Fund together, and the fund balance in the Internal Service Fund, the cushion of $6 million, is on top of the aggregate liability for all three of those items. Can you flip the slide, please? Okay. So this is a 5-year retrospective look of the P&L of the and I included 5 years of history here because the activity in the fund for the past 5 years is comparable to the activity we have in the fund today. I know that Mr. Schmidt provided some data which goes back to 2010 and shows a bunch of negative fund balances in the prior years, but that's not comparable to what we have today. Those back years were prior to the school district going on to the state insurance plan, for one thing. So there used to be about $40 or $45 million of activity flowing through the fund back then. And secondly, back then we weren't fully funding our long-term liabilities in the internal service fund, which is why we had a negative fund balance. So those back years are not comparable to the current funds, the fund's current activities, and that's why I've showed you 5 years here. So what I've got up here, again, is comparable, and you can see the numbers. The revenue is what's transferred into the general fund budgets, plus employee healthcare premiums. The expenses are the litigation settlements, the workers' comp claims, and the medical. So just focus on that blue highlighted expense line item for a moment. You can see that back in 2017, we had 15.9 million in total expenses. The next couple of years, it was in the $14 million range. It dropped down in 2020, as Mr. Schmidt said, that's the COVID year. And in 2021, it popped back up to about 14 million. So there's some historic variability in these numbers, but there's not huge levels of variability. 2020 is an anomaly, but generally what you see here is we've been in the $14–15 million range every year. And bear in mind, there are different components in there. Medical inflation does continue to increase, but our costs are also impacted by other things, including our demographics, retirements, etc. Workers' comp claims have actually been trending down the past few years. General liability claims have swung a couple of $100,000 in both directions year to year, but it's not a big band in terms of dollars. And all of that becomes relevant when you think about how much cushion you need on top of these total expenses. So you see the cushion, the fund balance on the last line in green. At the end of 2021, it had grown to 6 million, or 43% of expenses. And the town's projection for the fund balance at the end of this year was also 6 million. And next year, assuming the entire 850,000 was funded, the town projected the cushion would continue to be 6 million. So on the bottom line, you can see the impact of the Board of Finance cut. After our cut of 850,000, based on the town's projection, we will still have a cushion of 5.2 million. And again, that cushion is meant to cover variability in the $14 million of annual expenses for this fund. And we don't have variability even close to that magnitude. Can you flip the slide, please? Okay. Thank you. All right, so this is the history on the internal service fund balance sheet. You can see in the far right column, it holds assets of about 20 million, which is cash and investments. The 13,620,000, which is the total liabilities, that's made up of litigation, 2.4 million last year. Workers' comp, 9.4 million. That's the largest because it covers, long-term liabilities, and that's many years of future payouts. And the medical liability of 746,000. And that's a small number because it's a short-term liability. Most of the medical expenses are paid during the year, and that's just the processing lag on the claims. So the takeaway here, again, about the trends is really about the trends for each type of liability. There's not a tremendous amount of variability in dollar terms in relation to a $6 million cushion. Can you flip the slide, please? Okay. So, Mr. Schmidt stated that, he didn't understand this. So I'll do my best to explain the cut and the rationale behind it. So number one, the fund balance or the cushion has grown substantially since 2018, and it grew 1.6 million in fiscal 21 alone. And cushion is good. It is absolutely prudent to have cushion, especially in a fund like this where there's a lot of estimates. The question is, how much cushion is desirable? And that is a matter of judgment. And we don't have a policy on fund balance for the internal service fund like we do for the general fund. If we were to apply the general fund policy, which is that we should have a fund balance between 8 to 11% of expenses, you apply that to the roughly 14 million or so of expenses in this fund, and you'd be wanting a target fund balance of about 1.1 to 1.5 million. We have 6 million. So I'm not saying that the general fund benchmark is the right percentage. Probably wouldn't be a bad policy based on the annual volatility we've experienced in this fund, but it's a point of comparison. But again, we're nowhere near that. We're not near 8 to 11%. Last year, we were at 43%. Next points. I do want to emphasize that none of this is black or white. There's not a right or wrong answer here. This is a judgment. But a judgment is not just an opinion. It's reasoned and it's informed by data and facts and circumstances. And so what I've listed here are the facts that we considered in our judgment. First of all, the nature of the liabilities. What does that mean? Well, this one in particular can differ between towns who use their internal service funds for different types of activities. I talked about the types of liabilities that are in this fund for the town of Fairfield and the level of historical volatility we've had, which is not a lot in terms of dollars. The second one, budget practices, very important. So the biggest impact on fund balance is less about the volatility and the expenses, and it's more about how we budget and if we budget appropriately. We had a history of negative fund balance in this fund years ago because it was chronically underfunded in the budget. We didn't fund the long-term liabilities that were in there. The town did take action to correct that after a warning from the rating agencies. But we've built up a large fund balance now. Virtually all of it is because we overshot our budget the past couple of years in particular. And we didn't intentionally budget for cushion in this fund. We had a pandemic, the claims were low in 2020, and they were lower than we budgeted in 2021. And, that's not a criticism. These are estimates, and they were built in good faith with the assistance of third-party experts. And, by definition, estimates are always going to be too high or too low to some degree. But when you start trending too high or too low, you adjust. And when you decide what you need in a budget like this, you have to look at what you already have to start with. And what the town is starting with now is a big cushion, which is why the Board of Finance made the adjustment. On a go-forward basis in the budget, so health insurance, for example, we increased our budget for health insurance substantially for next year. It was originally too low, the town got updated estimates, and the Board of Finance increased it when we voted on the budget. So budget practices are a big factor here. If you budget aggressively, you're going to need more of a cushion. If you budget adequately or conservatively, it's the opposite. But that's something that's within the town's control. The third factor, risk and risk mitigation. So we talked about risk and volatility already, but let's talk about risk mitigation. The town is insured against catastrophic risks. We're insured against high medical claims. We're insured against high workers' comp claims. We're insured for general liability, and we have umbrella policies. That's the reason you don't see huge volatility in our historical numbers. And absolutely, bad things can happen. Medical costs can trend upward, etc. But based on how the town manages its risk and the nature of these liabilities, you'd have to have many, big, bad, unexpected things happen simultaneously to chew up a $6 million reserve as long as you're budgeting properly, which we did. So that gets back to the judgment. Do we want to budget for multiple catastrophes that may happen, or should we budget for what's plausible? So that gets to the fourth factor, which is cost. The town could choose to build up whatever level of cushion we're collectively willing to pay for. It doesn't have to be 5 million or 6 million. It could be 14 million, and we could cushion our liabilities at 100%. And I've actually seen one town in Connecticut that does that. And there's theoretically nothing wrong with it. It's just expensive. So that gets to the final item here. and that's economic factors and how that drives our fiscal policy. I'm sure it's not lost on anyone in this virtual room that we are in a period of high inflation right now, 8.5%. So when we tax our residents for the purpose of building cushions or propping up cushions, we're going to take their money, put it in a bank account, not use it, and let it decline in value to the tune of 8% a year. And, that is not a policy we should pursue, in my opinion. There are, times when it makes sense to put away money in a savings account. This isn't one of them. Can you flip the slide, please? Okay, so in summary, we talked about this in the Board of Finance meeting, and Mr. Schmidt alluded to it. Policy around this area should absolutely be developed so that we can have a consistent policy to budget and work toward as it relates to fund balances and targets in this fund. But we are in the budget process now. We need to make an informed judgment now about what's appropriate. And the majority believed it was appropriate to cut this budget because the fund balance in internal service is simply not warranted based on our risk profile. I've heard the cut characterized as reckless. It's not reckless. It's a fraction of what the fund balance increased by in just the last year. And it still leaves us with a significant cushion based on the town's own projections. The fund balance is 7 times the amount that we cut. I am not here to suggest that we have what we did this year is not indicative of any policy going forward. We should be evaluating this every year using a methodical approach. If we determine that we should have a fund balance at a certain level, we should be budgeting toward this in a way that makes sense, keeps our budget relatively consistent, and doesn't overtax our taxpayers. But our fund balance now was just very significant. So, the next point I want to make, this fund balance in the internal service fund, this is there. I don't want there to be any misunderstanding about this. This is there to cover risks related to the estimates recorded in the internal service fund, which is existing litigation, workers' comp claims, and healthcare claims. It's not there to cover unrelated liabilities. It's not there to cover things that haven't happened yet, or legal fees, or speculation about any event that might happen in the future. That's not what the $850,000 budget is for. It's not what the internal service fund is for. We have a fund balance in the general fund to cover potential future risks. And that fund balance in the general fund was $36 million at the end of last year, and it's going to grow even more because we're running a $10 million surplus in fiscal 22 based on our last quarterly review. So in summary, this budget of $850,000, $500,000 of which is being appealed in the view of the majority was not needed, will not be spent, cannot be invested in a way that benefits taxpayers, and simply preserves a cushion we believe is too high. And, for all the discussions about how much money we should be spending in this budget overall, whether on education or HR or anything else, all of that important debate is about money to be spent for the betterment of our community. This isn't. This is money we don't need and we don't spend. We will not spend, and therefore we don't believe it should be in the budget. Mr. Moderator, that's all I have for now, and I'll remain available if there are questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman Charlton. So we'll go to the body. Selectman Flynn, as ex officio, you've asked to speak.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. And thanks for recognizing me. Ms. Charlton, thank you for that presentation. In way of introduction, I know most of you, and I think most of you know my background, but I was on the Board of Finance for 14 years. I was chairman for 10 years, including during that time where we actually, because of past practice, got a negative watch due very specifically to a negative balance on the internal service fund at that time. I do want to correct one misconception, and I understand how this happened, but there's this commentary out there that there was no policy related to this account, and that's simply not true. Once we realized the issues with the accounts, and again, caused by underfunding in past years, we actually did adopt a policy. And that policy was to fund this account up to the amount that we thought we would need to cover the current year's activities every year. And that was done in concert and talking with our auditors and our outside advisors. Why? Because we were at a negative balance at that time, we couldn't put in a policy that said our policy is to get to, let's say, $4 million in funding. Why? Because we would immediately be against our policy and judged on that by the credit rating agencies. So, in fact, what the Board of Finance did this year was reverse the long-standing policy that had been put in place of funding it up to the amount that the estimates said we needed. And by the way, Lori's absolutely right. They're estimates. They can be right, they could be wrong. Sadly, in my 14 years in doing this and getting on 17 now, I've seen a lot of volatility. I've seen a lot of things I never thought I would see, both in the general fund as well as in the internal service fund. Also, I want to point out a couple things. Absolutely correct. There's two components to this now. There used to be three. There's the risk management portion, there's the medical expense portion on the town side. There used to be the medical expense portion on the Board of Ed side. And by the way, it's in those two areas that most of the underfunding happened in prior years. If we assume, to make this simple, that on the medical side, we have the best available information and we're going to come in right on the dot in terms of what our exposure is going forward, which, by the way, we never do. But for illustrative purposes, let's say we do, and we move that right to the side. Then you're dealing with the risk management portion, the lawsuits that we were talking about. Let's take a look at this. Pre-COVID, the 5-year average was $3.4 million worth of expense annually in that. Now, in COVID, when the courts were closed, when lawsuits weren't moving forward as quickly, that went down to about 1.9 million, which means there's about $1.5 million of pent up demand on our risk management fund. Now, you take our $6 million fund balance. I talked with Jared earlier. You see the risk management portion of this fund, you'll put about $1.6 million away this year. That brings the fund balance to about 7.8 million, or rather 7.6 million. Sorry. By the way, that 6 million is what the fund balance was in June 30th of last year, not necessarily what it's going to be June 30th of this year, but let's say it is. So that's 7.6 million. If you take the average of the last 5 years before COVID, plus the pent up demand for expense, one could argue that the estimate this year could be a $4.9 million hit against 7.8, which brings your balance to 2.7 million. Now, it's still positive. That's still a good thing. And I understand what Lori and the majority are going. But I've seen enough volatility here that scares me. And not knowing what's going to happen once this COVID thing is behind us and it starts loosening up, that scares me. To see what happened with some of the medical benefits and the costs and the differences we had there year over year, that scares me. It's all about risk. I do think reviewing this policy now, while we're in a positive position, affords the Board of Finance an opportunity that we didn't have during my time there. Because of the sound fiscal management we put in place, we were able to get to that level now. So I would do that before you completely wipe it out in 1 year. Or I would do that before you risk moving your fund balance down by 50% potentially in 1 year. That's all I'm saying about it. Come up with your policy and then next year do it appropriately after you have more information and when you're doing it from a known position of strength. Absolutely right. This resulted in a negative watch from credit rating agencies in previous years. There was significant fluctuation year over year in past years. And in speaking with our town controller, Ms. Bossi, who was part of this with me when we went through this over the last decade, and not to speak for her, but I will, we talked about this and she said, Tom, it's the scariest part of the budget right now, is that they would do this at this point in time. That's all I have. I appreciate the opportunity to address the body. Mr. Moderator, thank you very much. And Mrs. Charlton, thank you for the discussion. It was well done.
Thank you, Selectman Flynn. Were your comments, Madam Chairwoman, concerning Selectman Flynn's comments?
Yes, they were. Thank you, Mr.
Okay, 'cause
Moderator.
I'll let you go ahead to.
Yes, thank you. And I want to thank Selectman Flynn and, I always appreciate his perspective and the history he has with the Board of Finance. I wasn't aware there was a policy. I know we have a couple of written policies, so perhaps this was an informal policy meant to, fund the Internal Service Fund in a certain way. Nonetheless, it was an effective policy because we did get the fund balance up to a positive level after, 5 years ago or so, after the Board of Ed went into the state plan and this town, became focused on the town side of the medical budget. But I do want to address a couple of things that I really didn't understand in his comments. This comment, one about the courts being closed and pent up demand. Again, when you focus on the liabilities for this fund, it doesn't matter where lawsuits are in the court system. Every lawsuit that we have today, the town attorney gives us an understanding of the full portfolio of litigation, regardless of where it is in the process. And all of that is 100% accrued for. So even if it's in a very early stage and we think that someday this will settle for X, Y, or Z, even if it's been delayed, all of that is accrued for. So in terms of, the pent up demand, we may have some increased liabilities because they haven't settled yet, but the full portfolio of litigation is reserved for. And that's important to understand because again, this fund, and let me just finish.
Yeah.
This fund, the liabilities are for existing obligations. They are not for, guesses about liability that may happen in the future. So I did just want to clarify that piece. The other part, there was some discussion about the projections or, we don't know what the fund balance is going to be at this year end. And yes, the $6 million I referenced was the fund balance at the end of the last fiscal year. However, the town, and the town has provided this data to the RTM, by the way, the town projected, based on all the information we have year to date, that we would continue to have a $6 million fund balance at the end of this fiscal year and next fiscal year. So I just wanted to make that clear. And then the only last point I would like to make is, all this discussion about the rating agencies. Years ago, when there was a negative fund balance in the Internal Service Fund, that's a bad thing because a negative fund balance in the Internal Service Fund, the general fund is obligated to cover that. So what that means is there's a de facto liability in the general fund that's sitting off balance sheet. And yes, rating agencies don't like that. We don't have that situation right now, and we're not close to that situation. So, we're not measured on the size of what's in the Internal Service Fund. The real issue was that persistently for many years, we had that negative balance out there, and that was an obligation of the general fund that needed to be funded, and it was funded. So thank you for the chance to make that clarification.
Yeah, two things. Three things, and thank you, Ms. Charlton. Number one, I would urge everybody to support the appeal of the $500,000. Let me be very clear on that. Number two, you used the key word on the legal claims and the medical claims, and that is estimates. And because they are estimates, that's exactly what has the volatility. So to say that they are completely accrued for, they are not completely accrued for. The estimates are completely accrued for. As for the credit rating agencies, absolutely correct. When the credit rating agencies look at the town, they don't just look at this. They don't even just look at the fund balance. They look at about 26 different characteristics. Now, what saved us on the internal service fund for a number of years and being negative here was we were so well funded on the pension side at the point in time. That after the Madoff scandal, that took a hit. So we're not as well funded on the pension side as we were. We're okay and we're better than most, but we're not all. The second thing that saved us was the fact that we didn't have this issue over taxes. People weren't complaining about taxes. There was no concern at that point in time. As our budget has grown, that's gotten to be a little bit more of a concern. The third thing was that we had started funding OPEB, and that hadn't even been reported on back in the time. Now the financial reporting has changed on that, and we now have to focus more on OPEB, which again, that wasn't really factored in back in the day on the internal service fund. The other thing that happened is the state's financial situation. Now, don't really believe what they tell you about the state being flush this year. We still have billions upon billions of dollars of unfunded liability. The state is basically in a very tough financial strait. That factors into us because we live within this state. The last item I'll say is that the uncertainty that we've seen and that has hit us in the last number of years has been things such as the fill pile, COVID, hurricanes. Those add to the uncertainty over the credit rating agencies. Let me be clear. Do I think the credit rating
I'm sorry,
agencies are
Mr.
going to?
Flynn. Point of order. Can we stick to this amendment because we're
I
way
am.
over time?
Yeah.
Excuse me, this is from Mr. Moderator. Is point of order, could we stick to
You
this
said me.
specific?
Selectman Flynn, yes. If
Well,
we could just bring it to a conclusion here so we
sure.
can
We're
carry
not
on
gonna
with
we're
other
not gonna
questions.
we're not gonna lose our credit rating agencies over this year, but if you change this policy or if we go negative, it's gonna be more difficult. I would support the appeal if I were you.
Thank you, Selectman Flynn. Representative Sussman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Liz Asma, District 4. I just want to say quite belatedly, I would call a point of order on saying that this is the Board of Finance is a political vote. I have sat on the Board of Finance, for those of you who don't know me, and the RTM. I know what political votes look like. I know what political discourse sounds like, and I know what political justifications sound like. This is an impartial, brilliantly outlined forensic analysis, the likes of which I never saw when I was on the Board of Finance. And much of the justification I hear for restoring this tonight is irrelevant. This has been one of the probably worst or best examples of overtaxation that I have seen. We are asking taxpayers to fund millions upon millions of dollars of a slush fund for which there is no return on that investment. There are no services in kind. This is actually exactly how we help taxpayers in a time of inflation. And I don't think we need to entertain restoring this money at all. I think it would be incredibly irresponsible and fiscally irresponsible of this body. I will be voting against this, and I would urge my colleagues to do the same. I want to thank Chairwoman Charlton and her colleagues for the extraordinary job they've done and presenting us with what I think is really compelling evidence to support their vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Sussman. Are there any further comments from the body? Representative Bateson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ed Bateson, District 1. Interesting discussion. Having this thorn in my side for the past couple of decades, having to learn about this issue was painful in the beginning. I think Mr. Flynn summed it up pretty well. I understand Ms. Charlton's point of view, but there's a couple of things that are just nagging me about this. I would be willing, if we hadn't just gone through the pandemic, I might be willing to consider this. But I think in my heart, what I've seen is a lot of people have put off preventative medical care, right? You know, your routine stuff for the past 2 years. I'm no medical expert, but I fear that we're going to see an upswing in claims, and that's going to negatively affect this fund balance at the end of the year. Not at the end of the year, but at the end of 23. That's my fear. So yes, it's all judgment. Is the 850 too high? I'm no expert, but I just don't think this is the time to be throwing out the whole thing. I think the administration coming back with 500 is a reasonable compromise. I would like to entertain this discussion further, but for purposes of the budget, I'm not going to say there's too much risk here, but there is risk here considering what we just went through. And, you know, when life gets back to normal in the next 18 months, I mean, with inflation, I mean, you know, are we going to have Carlton come back with Aon and say, oh, yeah, we're not looking at 9% medical inflation, we're looking at 14. I mean, these things, that's what goes through my mind. So in trying to consider that, I would urge us all to support the 500. It worries me. And that's how I assess risk. Does it worry me? This one does to a degree. So I'd ask we all consider restoring the 500. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Representative Bateson. Any other comments from the body? Representative Georgiadis.
Hi, Drew Georgiadis, District 9. I want to thank Chairwoman Charlton for a very articulate explanation regarding the Internal Service Fund and how it's only for current liabilities and existing claims. I would just like to make a comment because there's a lot, I know it's a very fearful time, and Mr. Flynn was talking about what he's afraid of, and Mr. Bateson as well, what he fears. But I think a lot of people in Fairfield don't have the insurance that the town has. I was very reassured to find out how much insurance the town has regarding all of the liabilities we have regarding medical claims and other liabilities. But I am not supporting an overtaxation right now because a lot of residents in Fairfield don't have insurance for things that are coming up in their personal life, and this is not the time to overtax our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Georgiadis. Any further comments? Okay, seeing none, I'll go to the public. Please put your name in the chat. If you would like to comment, now is your chance. Okay, I'll bring it back to the body. Any further comments from the body? Okay, we'll take it to a vote. We'll probably be split again, so roll call vote, Betsy, please.
Ed Bateson,
Yes.
Melissa Longo,
Oh, shit. Sorry.
Yes.
Marty Fury,
Yes.
Amy Ruggiero,
Yes.
Karen McCormick,
Yes.
Cindy Perham,
No.
Jeff Steele,
Yes.
Alex Durrell,
Yes.
Jeff Galdenzi,
No.
Tom Lambert,
No.
Sharon Pistilli,
No.
Laura Carson,
No.
Alice Kelly,
No.
Liz Ezema,
No.
Will Diaz.
You
No.
skipped me, Representative Spolier.
I'm sorry, Marcy.
No.
Your vote? Thank you. Will Diaz,
No.
Josh Garskoff,
No.
Joe Siebert,
No.
Jay Wolk,
No.
Steve Barretts, Hannah Gale,
Yes.
Andy Graceffa,
No.
Lisa Havey,
No.
John Kuhn,
No.
Mark McDermott,
No.
Jill Vergara,
No.
Karen Wackerman,
No, and Betsy, Steve Barris has a vote of no in the chat. I don't know if you can see
I
that.
see it in the chat.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Hank Ferentz,
Yes.
Pamela Iacono,
Yes.
Christine Messina,
Yes.
Peter Tallman,
Yes.
Christine Brown,
No.
Drew Georgiadis,
No.
Margaret Horton,
No.
Kelly Cinto,
Yes.
Ken Astorita,
Yes.
Peter Britton,
Yes.
Frank Batiste,
Yes.
Story Tallman,
Yes.
$17 yes, 22 no.
Okay, that motion fails. For the public who is just joining us, we are still in the special meeting for the appeals. We are not in the budget vote meeting yet. So if you have comments, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to wait. And I plan on taking a probably a 10-minute break in between meetings. So the RTM and those other presenters or the administration can have a bathroom break and get a drink of a non-alcoholic drink of non-adult beverage of sorts. So item number 4, to hear and consider an appeal by the first selectwoman and the chief fiscal officer from the following vote of the Board of Finance pertaining to the contingency 2010 budget to reduce the contingency account number 58010 by $350,000. Request full restoration. Requested contingency was $2,768,149. The Board of Finance approved $418,149. Do I have a motion to approve? Representative Vogt, seconded by Representative Ferentz. Thank you. Mr. Schmidt, are you going to go here again?
I'm back and I'll do this again,
All right,
although I think I know what the outcome's gonna be.
you're up, my man.
So as the appeal was introduced, this is a $350,000 cut to our contingency fund, which is admittedly heavily funded right now at about $2.6 million. And the reason for that is we have, prior to recently, we had pretty much every one of our contracts that had not been settled. And so this was in part to put aside money for those unsettled contracts. And in a lot of cases, it was for multiple years of unsettled contracts, and that's why that that money is there. There's a separate piece of this, and without going into too much detail, typically to go into detail, we would need to go into executive session, but suffice to say there's a, what we typically call normal contingency. So there are kind of two aspects to the contingency. It gets to a point where you cut enough money out of the contingency and you've eliminated our normal contingency. The problem with that is normal contingency is the town's only tool. It's the only tool that we have to be able to react to an emergency situation. We have some very little, state statute gives us very little authority to respond and just make changes and add money to, or add an appropriation that's not there. And so the only tool that we have is contingency, and in particular, normal contingency. It's the only thing in the budget that, the only money in the budget that is not spoken for in some way. And so I say this because it's, if the money appropriated in contingency and there is an emergency, that money can be transferred quickly. So we can, the way it's set up and what the state statute says is that if you have a contingent fund, there's money in it, you can go to the Board of Finance, and that's the only body that needs to approve that transfer from contingency. And so the money, yes, the money matters, the dollar amount of the money matters, but you've not just eliminated funding here, you've eliminated, again, the only tool that we have to react to an emergency. So if this money goes away, we will need to go to, and we happen to have an emergency that comes up, we'll need to go to all three boards to get approval for additional funding. Within a certain amount, that we have some flexibility within a certain amount of what's in each department to be able to use some money if there may be money still remaining within a department's budget overall. But if it's an emergency where it's where the dollar amount exceeds and will cause us to go over that budget, we would have to go to all three boards and seek approval in an emergency situation. So I guess I'm asking you to look at this a little bit differently, and it's not just about the money. It's about this being risky to the town because we don't have that ability if this money goes away. There are, right now, we don't know what's going to happen with the, with all the contracts that are outstanding. We've had 3 that have settled. And again, the funding is in the contingency to cover those. But we have, those are 3 small ones. We have 4 that are remaining that are our largest contract, our largest unions in terms of the dollar amount and the number of people covered. One in particular, as was mentioned, is the fire union, which is in arbitration. We don't know how that's going to turn out. It's arbitration, and you know, we don't know where that decision is going to end up, and we don't know what impact that's going to have on the money that we set aside in contingency. It could, you know, it could potentially eat into a lot of it. And so again, we would be left in a situation in that case where we have nowhere to go to for an emergency situation. So we're asking you to, again, please support this appeal so that we have that opportunity and we have this safety blanket for emergency situations. And I hope that you'll support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Madam Chairwoman Charlton.
Thank you again, Mr. Moderator. And, thank you, Mr. Schmidt, for your comments. I understand where you're coming from. I do. I'm going to try to be brief here because I know we're trying to get this meeting over with. This one really is pretty straightforward in terms of the rationale. So I'll go through it quickly. And I'm just going to come back to the theme of budgeting for unnecessary cushions. I'm not sure why Mr. Schmidt referred to this as the only tool we have. I don't think that's true. But nonetheless, let me go forth. The view, put forth by the administration, not just tonight, but in our budget meetings previously, is that this normal contingency is important to have as a budget cushion because all sorts of unexpected things can happen. Storms are frequently used as an example. And so that position seems to make sense, especially, for a town that has a Hurricane Sandy in its history. But this is the reality. Emergencies are not what this contingency has generally been used for. If you look back at our history over the past many years, we've actually not needed any contingency. We've budgeted some and we've used some, and it's been convenient to have, but we really haven't needed a nickel of it. And the reason we haven't is that this town has generated millions of dollars of surpluses every year that could have alternatively been used to cover unexpected items. This year we're in right now, fiscal 22, we are running a budget surplus as of our last report of $10 million. We generated a $10 million surplus last year. In fact, over the previous 4 years, not including the current year we're in, from 2017 to 2021, we generated over $26 million of budgetary surplus. Out of that $26 million, the town, with the approval of the Board of Finance, designated about 17 of it for other uses, and 9 million of it went to fund balance. I'm not sure what the fate of the 10 million of fiscal 22 surplus is going to be, or if it will grow even larger when we get our next quarterly update. But the bottom line, speaking for the majority who voted for the cut, we felt we could not sit here and credibly continue to support unallocated contingency in the budget on the basis that the town is subject to terrible risks without it. And in saying that, I don't want to be dismissive of the obvious counterpoints because they were considered carefully. First of all, we recognize that history is not necessarily predictive of the future, but our history with contingency and surpluses is pretty difficult to ignore. Surpluses are great to have at the end of the year, and we've had a lot of them. And there's a thoughtful process the town goes through to determine how to allocate those surpluses for future spending or capital, or have them fall to fund balance. Those decisions require votes from the Board of Finance and sometimes the RTM, depending on the source of the surpluses. I personally have voted for those allocations, and all that's been handled responsibly. But those budget surpluses are determined at year end. They're handled after the fact, outside of the budget process. And because of that, it gets relatively minimal, transparency to the public. And, the amounts I'm talking about are staggering sums of money. $10 million is about 9% of the entire townside budget. And in the last couple of years, not all, but a lot of that surplus was generated from the revenue side. So, this past fall, we had a big windfall in back taxes. Last year, we had upside in revenue because we budgeted conservatively. Both years, our expenses have run under budget. It's a different story and a combination of factors every year. In 2020, in the early days of the pandemic, you may all recall that we offered a tax deferral to residents. So for the year ending in June 2020, our tax collections came in substantially lower than budget. We still ended up with a $2.5 million surplus because of vacancies and a bunch of other things. And we ended up putting that extra money toward OPEB, which was great. I advocated for that to be the disposition of the money. But the point is, when this is happening in our budgets year after year after year in material amounts, we should look with a really critical eye at the notion of putting these cushions in our budget. The second point, I want to make is, I do recognize actual emergencies can and do occur. And we've had them. We've had plenty of weather events. We had Tropical Storm Ida last fall. We had Hurricane Isaias the year before that. We've had plenty of northeasters. We had a pandemic. We didn't rely on or even touch contingency for any of those things. We absorbed costs in our operating budgets, and for the big storms, we got federal and state disaster relief funding. So we talk a lot about weather events when we talk about contingency, but that's not really what we're using the normal contingency budget for. Now, some amounts of contingency have absolutely been used for various issues over the past number of years. I believe that detail was provided to the RTM. We talked about that a bit in the Board of Finance meeting. But I think the number over the past 5 years that we've used in contingency is, I don't know, $500,000. And again, it's good that we had that. To Mr. Schmidt's point, it made asking for the money convenient. But $500,000, you know what? The town could have paid for that 50 times over, literally, with the budget surplus that we generated during the same period of time. So, yes, the concept of contingency is a valid one, and we may have, in fact, a catastrophic event in our town one day in the future. But if we do, 350,000 is not the pot of money we're going to be looking for. And that's not what the money is typically intended for or used for. In real emergencies, we'd be looking for emergency declarations and state and federal aid, as we always have. And of course, let's not forget that when it comes to true emergencies and unforeseen events, we have our fund balance, 36 million before this year's surplus. And that's the purpose of having it. So, just to sum this up, I will acknowledge Representative Iacono made reference before to, getting to a number. I don't think we used this $350,000 cut to get to a number, but we were cognizant of the impact on taxes. And, we thought about that. But we also primarily made this cut because we just don't believe that budgeting this contingency is warranted, and particularly this year. This is not overall an austere budget that's before us. This is a budget that has substantial spending increases across the board on the town side, on the Board of Ed side. It makes numerous significant investments in the town, and we believe that we need to manage within that budget. So that's all I have for now. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Okay, we'll go to the body. Representative Gale.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. My question is through you to the first select woman. And I need to preface it by recalling the history of, I believe it was 2018, but it might have been 2017, when this body was in a similar argument about the contingency fund in regard to about $800,000, I believe, that was in dispute. That was at that time the first selectman wanted to be assigned to the DPW budget under Scott Bartlett, who was at that time the director. And there was a big argument because the Board of Finance wanted that amount of money in the contingency fund, because then the Board of Finance would have oversight over those funds. And I remember after an exhaustively long evening, the first selectman just then decided to remove the request for the $800,000 from the budget period and said that he would just find it somewhere. And I'm bringing it up because that is the kind of lack of transparency that was going on in the previous administration as compared to right now, where we have transparency. And as far as I understand it, and this is my question to the first select woman, the contingency fund is the thing that allows our government to function. Whenever there is an unfunded need, it is appropriately, the Board of Finance is appropriately approached, and that funding is taken from the contingency fund. What does it do to the ability to run our town government on a day-to-day basis to not have anything in this fund? And I'm also reminded of just last week, we heard a testimony from the Registrar of Voters that when we're in a situation where there's a primary or there is an unexpected election.
Point of order, Mr. Moderator. This is not pertaining to this item.
He approaches the Board of Finance and asks for that money from the contingency fund.
Representative
That's
Gale,
an
please get to the
emergency.
point.
I've just gotten to the point. I am asking the first select woman what this does to the town government.
Madam First Select Woman.
Yes, thank you. Well, Representative, this is only my third budget. I can't speak about what happened in 2018. I do believe that a town of our size with a budget of our size should have a contingency. It just makes sense. Every project ever done in the history of the town has a contingency. I believe the Board of Ed has a contingency. Everyone has contingency. We have massive things that happen, as the chairwoman of the Board of Finance said, and there has to be some flexibility and ability for the leader of a town to be able to do things and manage things when they come up. So frankly, it's not a huge amount of money, $350,000 in an over $300 million budget. And I think we should have a contingency. And so I do support the appeal, and I would hope that the RTM would consider it in a bipartisan fashion. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Madam First Select Woman. Thank you, Representative Gale. Representative Georgiadis.
Hi, Drew Georgiadis, District 9. Through you, Mr. Moderator, to Mr. Schmidt. Thank you for your concern and your how much you care about the town, because I think it's evident in your comments, Mr. Schmidt. My question is, my understanding is that the Board of Education budget, which the Board of Ed reduced from the request from the superintendent, they need to stay within their budget. If they have additional costs, they can't ask for more money and they don't have a contingency. So on the town side, which is about, what, 35% of the budget that the first selectwoman just mentioned, you do have these budgets. You don't have to stay within your budget. And the fact that you can go to the three bodies and we will approve the money. We did it with Veric. We approved 4.6 million. Do you not have confidence that the three boards will support you and the town if the town needs money? Because we have proven that we have. Do you not agree with that?
The answer is I don't know. Because the problem is that if there is an emergency situation where we need to be able to spend money or commit to spending money, obligate the town to spend money, we can't go to three boards if it's an emergency.
Well, you can.
If it's an emergency
It just takes a little more
of a certain dollar amount, then you're not in an emergency situation. If you're saying that it takes more time, then you're not in a true emergency situation.
But there's $36 million in the contingency. And the $36 million in the contingency is not enough, in your opinion. So, okay, thank you.
No. The issue is not the dollar amount. The issue is how quickly we can respond, because state statute does not allow us to obligate the town to spend money beyond the amount that's appropriated without getting the right approval.
I understand that, but there's $36 million in the contingency currently that you don't have to go to the three boards for. So thank you very much, Mr. Schmidt.
there's $36 million in the town's fund balance.
Not in the contingency. Just to answer your question, just to bring up something you brought up, Representative, I have a document here, 2019, that the Board of Finance transferred $141,768 from the general fund contingency to the Board of Ed budget.
Was that
For
the
cost
same
to
year the
move
Board
and
of Ed gave
retrofit.
back the $3 million because they didn't use the buses? Or was that 2020? I can't remember.
I don't know, it's just telling you that you said they don't have the opportunity or ability to get transferred funds, and they do.
Okay, and they also return money like the $3 million in 2020. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Georgiadis and Mr. Schmidt. Representative Bastilli.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Through you, Mr. Moderator, to Ms. Charlton. Ms. Charlton, could you just clarify, based on prior comments, like how contingency is actually used? And then also, does Board of Ed have contingency, and what is the current what would the current balance be, and how does, like, the fact that some of these contracts are actually settled, like, how does that explain whether or not contingency may be under or overstated? Multifaceted.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, let me see if I can remember all your questions. So the first one, in terms of process, if I understood it correctly, and how contingency can be used. So it's just, the administration comes to the Board of Finance and requests for a transfer out of contingency to whatever account the money is needed for. If there's surplus that's arisen from the expense side of the budget. So if one department is underspent, the administration can essentially do the same thing. They can come to the Board of Finance and ask to transfer money from one department to another. If the surplus is generated on the revenue side, then the RTM needs to approve that as well. So I hope that was answering your first question. On the second question, the Board of Ed does not, as far as I'm aware, have a contingency. I don't know if anyone from the Board of Ed is on this call, but my understanding is they do not have their own contingency account. The third item is, I'm not sure I can answer that. I thought I recalled when we saw the justification for the wage reserve in this year's contingency. At the time we discussed it, that all the contracts were open at that point, and Mr. Schmidt has just said earlier that 3 had been settled. So I'm not sure if I heard that right, but Mr. Schmidt, maybe you can clarify through you, Mr. Moderator, because if that's the case, the remaining contingency would have dollars in it for next year that were actually paid out of this year's contingency. So maybe you can clarify that.
What's the question?
So the question was, I thought I heard you say earlier that we had recently settled 3 collective bargaining agreements. And I thought I recalled when we reviewed the amount in the contingency for next year's budget that all of those contracts were open. And so next year's contingency budget actually included money for all of them. So I was just asking for a clarification. Do we now have too much in next year's contingency because we've actually settled 3 of those contracts that are in next year's number?
No, the money is there, whether it's in contingency or in the department, the money is there. So if it's in contingency now, it will be moved into the department. So it's not like we have extra money in contingency. So for those 3 settled contracts, at some point, either before the end of this year or next year, that money would be moved out of contingency and into into each of the departments, into their salary lines.
Okay, yeah, I understand that, but if they were settled this year, then we would use this year's contingency to move that retroactive money. And meanwhile, we've budgeted money in next year's contingency to do that. I just want to make sure I'm understanding that right.
No, because the money right now is in contingency, but it would get moved out and would get moved into the departments. It would no longer be in contingency.
Right, but was it not rebudgeted for next year, I guess is my question.
That's right. I'm sorry, what was your question?
Was it not rebudgeted for next year on the basis that the contracts were still open when we did the budget this year?
It was, yep. Because at the time, we didn't know where it was going to be, and now we know, at least for those three that have settled, we know that that money is going to go into those departments.
Okay, so I guess I'm, Mr. Moderator, maybe somebody on the body wants to answer these questions. I'm not sure I understand that. I think if we budgeted for contingency for next year, that's actually going to pay, be paid out of this year's budget. I'm a little confused about that, but I'll step back.
Madam Chair, because Frank Magneri, our budget director, did the calculation, so I'll get him to come up here and he might be able to explain it better.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so the way that the contingency works is that, so we had some contracts that settled after the Board of Finance deliberated and heard about contingency, so that was what was referred to that. What was in contingency for FY22 would be a reserve for any contracts that settled in FY22 and are going to have a retro for FY22. So last year when we did the budget for FY22, right, there were none of the contracts were settled or only a portion of the contracts were settled. And so we had to put that money in contingency in case they did settle. Right now we're at the end of our fiscal year pretty much, or pretty close to it, and now we have these contracts settling. So now we're going to have retroactive payments for prior fiscal years, which I know, Madam Chair of the Board of Finance, I know you're familiar with accrued salaries and so on and so forth. So that would take care of the prior year's retro. But for FY22, that's what the contingency would take care of. It would take care of the retroactive payments for the current fiscal year. Now, when you're budgeting for FY23, if you look at those personnel summary sheets that are behind all the departments, you'll see backup salary information there, and that backup salary information is in the terms of the old contract, because at the time this budget was developed, we didn't have any settled contracts, so we had to put the money in contingency. So, basically it's a one-for-one swap with these settled contracts. They wouldn't be in contingency anymore. They would be in, they would just cover the regular salaries for the next fiscal year. So it wouldn't be the case that there's some kind of double counting going on.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, I'm sorry, this is a follow-on. So, but is it recognized in this year, or is it included in this budget number for next year? That's the part I don't get.
When you say is it, what do you mean by it?
So the accrued wages that we have to pay as a result of the contract settlements that are going to show up on the salary lines.
So contingency isn't really a traditional expense, right? It's almost I always look at it as authority, appropriation authority that you could shift to other lines. So the accrued salaries is a balance sheet account. It's not actually an expense. This gets into the mechanics of contingency, and it is hard to explain, so I'm going to apologize if I don't explain it the best. But what's in accrued salary is for all prior fiscal years that have passed with unsettled contracts. And so, you have a contingency or reserve for salary for a fiscal year, and then at the end of that fiscal year, the expense has to be recognized. So you move it from contingency, you debit your payroll expense, and then you have contingency, and there's accounting that goes on there.
So then, I'm sorry to interrupt. So then my question
Yeah,
is,
sure.
if the contracts are settled in fiscal year 21, 22, then the accrued wages or salaries come out of contingency in fiscal year 21, 22. The contingency number we're looking at now is 21, 22, 23. So that means the contracts that were just settled are not included in this contingency number. True or false, I guess?
No, but I'm kind of just missing your point, or maybe we may be saying the same thing but a little bit differently, right? Whatever is in your personnel lines in this FY23 budget, the backup that you have for each department is in terms of their expired contract. What's in contingency are the cost of living increases that we would have expected to potentially be negotiated. So what's in contingency, when we're talking about contingency right now in terms of the FY23 budget, still needs to be there because it's not there in each of the individual departments.
Okay, thank you. And also, Mr. Moderator, Ms. Vitale said that she could talk about contingency with relation to the BOE.
Okay.
Thank you, Representative Bastilli. I see that. Chairwoman Vitale.
Hi, everybody. Christine Vitale, Chair of the Board of Education. Just to clarify, the Board of Education does not have a contingency fund to that we can access for emergencies. In 2019, I believe the figure that Ms. Kupchak referenced, you may recall that the Board of Ed had to move its maintenance department out of the property that was owned by Julian, and it was not something that we budgeted for. It was unforeseen. It was somewhat of a town emergency at that time, so we went to the Board of Finance and they covered those moving expenses. And that's what that expense was for in 2019. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Vitale. Representative Zesma.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Liz Esma, District 4, and through you to Madam Chairwoman Lori Charlton. Lori, it was a regular, maybe infrequent practice when I was on the Board of Finance to take things out of the operating budget that belong there and that were actually needed and put them in contingency and claim they could be earmarked. Some of that money never got back to where it belonged. You know, the library literally is still, after all these years, missing funds for materials. But can you just generally explain the idea of whether or not a contingency fund can be earmarked? I think that's something that, you know, we would benefit from hearing a little clarification on.
Yes, Representative Zesma. So the contingency can be earmarked, but that's not binding in any way. So when we say earmark, I think what that means is that when the contingency is built, the amount may be, you know, built with paying certain things out of it. And the wage reserve is a perfect example. So unsettled labor contracts, when we budget for contingency, part of that is earmarked for those contracts, and that's how the number's built. But if the contingency is not needed for that reason, for example, or things change, the money's fungible, and ultimately it can be spent in a way that is any way that's necessary or desirable, as long as there is a vote from the Board of Finance to do that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I mean, I've heard previous justifications for lowering the budget, creating a cliff, kicking the can down the road, putting money in a fund that I never believed. And I think your answer supports that. You can't make a promise that that money will come back into the budget or back into the line item where it belongs. It's not the proper way to manage the operating side of the budget. And thank you for your answer. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Representative Zesma. And Madam Chairwoman Charlton. Representative Kuhn, I think you know better. I see your hand up. You're supposed to put you want to speak in the chat unless you're just waving at us.
Sorry, Mr. Moderator. Depending on the meeting I'm in, some people wanted the hand raised, some people wanted in the chat. Question for, I guess, Jared and Frank, is that his name? I'm sorry, the budget director.
Yes.
Regarding contingencies. This is my first budget with contingencies, and when I got on to the RTM, one of the first things we tackled was an emergency meeting related to Gould Manor expenses that had not yet been appropriated but had been spent. Is that the kind of thing, or I think what I'm understanding now is that sort of thing is not what this contingency is for. So in that case, you had to come, I believe it was before all the bodies to get approval for that retroactively because that money had already been spent without approval. Is that where the contingency should be applied?
In my opinion, the contingency is set up, and if you read the statute, it's set up to be an emergency fund. So if you need to be able to, and it is the only tool that we can use quickly, that we only have to go to the Board of Finance. And it's the only pot of money that's not spoken for in some way. There was talk earlier, I know the chairwoman pointed out that we have these massive surpluses. We don't know we have a massive surplus until after the year is done. So that's not helpful in an emergency situation. If we have an emergency that comes up in January or February, we can project and we can estimate that there's going to be a surplus by the end of the year, but we don't know that. So the only money that is out there, if there's an emergency of a certain amount that we can access, is a contingency fund. And I understand that maybe in the past, and it's situational, that when there was a storm, we didn't use it, but that's why it's contingency, and that's why they're called emergencies, because you don't anticipate them. You don't know when they're gonna come. And so, and they don't always happen. But when they do, we're gonna want that money to be there. And it's not as if the point was also made that this is overtaxing people. It's not. That's just not true. Everybody knows that we have other expenses that this money gets used for, other legitimate, necessary expenses, including things like a fill pile. So at the end of the year, if we have a surplus and it's due to this, the money's going to get spent. We're not wasting taxpayer money. We're not overtaxing people.
But in this instance, your expectation is that this is a liability that is for cost of living adjustment, wages for the contracts, and you'll pay out a lump sum when that is done. Is that a fair assessment of what you're thinking right now? Obviously, understanding that, things can change. But when you go through your budget process, you sort of went, okay, contract payments are this, there's a cost of living adjustment. We're not sure exactly what that's going to be, depending on how the contract is finally negotiated. We're going to have to pay between X and Y, so we'll put a contingency in for Y. Is that a fair way to look at it?
As Frank said, that money for retroactive payments, which I think is what you're referring to, for contracts that are expired and then are settled, that money would be in our salary reserve, and would come out of there. And yes, it would happen in lump sum payments. We have to go back and apply those increases that ultimately got approved to past salary levels and figure out what those lump sum retroactive payments are.
Right. I guess at that point it would be recognized a liability. It would be named as that liability on the balance sheet and no longer a contingency. So the contingency is really just that, a straight contingency. Could be used for Gould Manor if you end up spending money you don't have, could be used for storm damage, whatever it might be.
The contingency could, typically when we think about it, I think the example was brought up, a storm. That is a classic example of when we might use contingency.
Okay, and this is 350,000, I think, if I recall.
When I say contingency, I mean the normal contingency. There's obviously we talked about the two different kinds.
Sure.
There's normal salary contingency.
Sure. And I guess, well, yeah, I won't belabor the point, but I'm just sort of curious why a contingency was not available for the Gould Manor situation earlier this year. Had it already been spent?
The salary contingency was already contingency was already spoken for by unsettled contracts.
Okay, but this would have been a contingency. Just okay. Maybe I'm blending the two contingencies here. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Kuhn. Mr. Schmidt, Representative Vergara.
Thank you. Jill Vergara for District 7. Can you all hear me? I apologize. I can't be on camera, but my internet is acting up.
We can hear you.
Thank you. So I have a question and I also have a point of information. I'll start with the question, which is for Mr. Schmidt. There were 6 open contracts and those were used in formulating the contingency number. But Mr. Schmidt stated that there are now 3. So how much did those 3 contracts settle for? What is the dollar amount?
The dollar, so that question is difficult to answer because what has been settled and was, I think it only went to the RTM a couple weeks ago. 2 of the ones that I'm thinking of are nurses, and I think the other one was PETA. But what you have to look at is the percentages, and then, we'd have to apply that to do a retro based on actual salaries to see what the lump sum payouts are going to be, and those haven't been done. So I can't provide a number at this time.
Okay, not even a ballpark?
No.
Okay. All right. And I also had
I mean, the formula for calculating it is, if you're going back if you're going back 3 years, then you got to take actual salaries, the formula is to take, actuals and then multiply it by the percentage COLAs, but there's compounding involved, so I couldn't provide even a ballpark. I wouldn't want to give you the wrong information.
Okay, and can you just verify the 3 contracts that closed? It was nurses, PETA, and what else?
Nurses, PETA, and I think ECC.
ECC. Okay. All right. And I also had a point of information. I think that the first select woman had stated that 350,000 in contingency isn't so much for such a large budget of our town size, but I just wanted to clarify that even after the Board of Finance's cut to contingency, we are left with 2.4 million in contingency, which is higher than any of the previous 5 years were budgeted for. So for instance, in last year's budget, we budgeted 1.586 million. So the 2.4 that we're left with is far exceeding that. In the previous year in FY21, it was budgeted for 1 million. In FY20,
Ms. Vergara, can I just?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, and I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to make, the distinction very clear that, the cut, this cut would essentially, there's backup behind these contingency numbers, and it would remove, the 350,000 is the amount of the normal contingency, which is for, kind of some of the examples about storms and so on that Jared spoke about. whatever's would be left there is your reserve for salaries, which I would advise that you would not touch at all. Those are for that's budget appropriation that you very much need. And I just want to be clear, because I've kind of heard some of this talking, that, I've looked at these formulas many, many times. I went over them with the Board of Finance, and I can assure that there's no double counting involved, and there's no double appropriating. This is the money that you need. And I just want to be really clear about that from a budget perspective.
Okay, but you've already outlined some things that were included in this contingency that are no longer there anymore, like these 3 settled contracts that you can't give us numbers for.
No, but like I said, you need, right? So yeah, they're in contingency in FY23, but they're not in the regular salaries. So now you have these 3 contracts, right, that have settled. But you don't have the appropriation authority in the departments, in the regular salaries line. So it's going to be a 1-for-1 swap. It's not like the contingency goes away because the contracts are settled. That's not how it works. That's just not how it works.
Huh. Okay, that's not corresponding with how I have always understood contingency to be, but I did want to still point out the history of contingency, though, which was the budgeted amounts. And in saying that, the budgeted amount that we have left, it's not zeroing out contingency. We are left with a $2.418 million budgeted contingency, and prior years were much less. If you give me some time, I'll delineate those numbers. And I think yes.
I'm sorry, but I also just want to, and I'm sorry for interrupting you again, but I just want to make the distinction that there would be more this year because there were more there were 6 unsettled contracts.
Yeah, it was an astounding
And now there's
number
3,
of
but like I
unsettled
said, it's a
contracts.
1-for-1 swap. So.
Yeah, I know it was a very high number of unsettled contracts. Was very unusual. So last year it was 1.58 million in contingency. The previous year, FY21, was 1.038 million in contingency. FY20 was 329,000 in contingency. FY19 was 1.269 in contingency. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Vergara. Any other questions on this item from the body? Okay, seeing none, I'll take it to the public. And for the public, this is still part of our appeals meeting concerning contingency of $350,000. Put your name in the chat if you have a comment. Otherwise, we'll take this to the body for a vote. Betsy, we'll do a roll call.
Ed Bateson,
Yes.
Melissa Longo,
Yes.
Marty Fury, Amy Ruggiero,
Yes.
Karen McCormick,
Yes.
Cindy Perham,
No.
Jeff Steele,
Yes.
Alex Durrell,
Yes.
Jeff Galdenzi,
No.
Tom Lambert,
No.
Sharon Pastilli, Laura Carson,
No.
Alice Kelly,
No.
Marcy Spalier,
No.
Liz Ezma,
No.
Will Diaz,
No.
Josh Garskoff,
Sorry, no.
Joe Siebert,
No.
Jay Wolk,
No.
Steve Barrett,
No.
Hannah Gale,
Yes.
Andy Grisefa,
No.
Lisa Havey,
No.
Joan Kuhn,
No.
Mark McDermott,
No.
Jill Vergara,
No.
Karen Wackerman,
No.
Hank Ferentz,
Yes.
Pamela Iacono,
Yes.
Christine Messina,
Yes.
Pete Tallman,
Yes.
Christine Brown,
No.
Drew Georgiadis,
No.
Margaret Horton,
No.
Kelly Sinto,
Yes.
Ken Astorita,
Yes.
Peter Britton,
Yes.
Frank Patisse,
Yes.
Story Tolman.
Yes.
Seventeen yes, 22 no. And I did get Marty Fury, who voted a yes, and Sharon Pastilli, who voted no.
Thank you, Betsy.
Thank you. Motion, Alex, please. Thank you, Betsy. Motion fails. Okay, let's see, it's 9:53 PM. Let's all resume at 10:10, if that's okay with everybody. Get yourself some drinks for hydration for the next go-round. And I'll make a motion to adjourn. Anybody? Representative Lopes?
No,
Representative Carson?
Mark, don't adjourn. Just call a recess. You're good.
You don't want to do the pledge again in the roll call?
Oh, okay. All right, good. All right, yep, sorry. I was thinking you were just taking a break in between meetings. Sorry, my fault. It's way too late for me.
It's past your bedtime, I know. Well, we'll be back at 10:10, okay?
Oh, we need a second though to adjourn?
All in
Second.
favor? Aye.
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 Thank you.